Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto x Lady Nagant harem in My Hero Academia. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by JEAN010 and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Prologue. Legacy. You're leaving again. It wasn't a question, but a statement, spoken with so much dread and pain that it made him freeze in his tracks, his own body more than a bit reluctant to turn around, knowing pretty well what side awaited him. But even so he did, albeit slowly, for he knew that this would be nothing compared to what he would have to face in the future, or at the very least that's what he told himself. It didn't make it any easier though, to see the hurt in her green eyes. It almost made him recoil, in fact, for he knew he was the only one person responsible for such heartbroken look. But even so, he remained frozen in place, while doing his best to make sure his expression didn't betray him. It was far easier now than before, of course. At one point, he had probably been an open book to the woman in front of him, for that's what the last 3 years of living, studying, fighting alongside each other had brought. But right now, he couldn't show her that. He didn't even know if he could be considered the same person that she had once known. If he had been, he would have already dropped the bag in his arm and would have rushed to hug girl in a sad attempt of soothing the pain that he himself had caused. But right now, the only thing he could offer her was a smile. A pathetic one that didn't resemble the sight she was used to even a bit, but it was the best he could muster right now. Even then though, it seemed she caught the meaning of it quite quickly. She had always been the smart one of the two, after all. I won't let you. He heard her whisper, her slight stutter bringing back fondness that he knew he couldn't allow himself to feel right now. And not again, I can't. That was just who she was, he knew. Always trying to help others, even those that didn't want her help in the first place. No wonder All Might had chosen her, really. She just cared too much. That was probably how she realized something had been wrong in the first place. This wasn't the first time he had left UA in a hurry in the middle of the night, after all. But last time, he had every intention of returning after cleaning up his name. Now though? This would be the last time he ever stood inside these walls. It would be his last day as member of Class 3A, even if the school year had just started. It would also be the last time he faced her, at least for a long time. And she seemed to be aware of that, but there was really nothing that she could do by now. They both simply had to keep moving forward. Plus ultra, as they said, even if their future paths clashed in more ways than once. But by Midoriya. When was the last time he called her by her last name only? A long-ass time ago, he knew. It sounded so detached, even cold to his lips, but it was also a necessity, for both of them. And at the back of his head, a small part of him realized the irony of the situation. Hadn't he been, at one point in his life, standing on the opposite end of a similar discussion? He had ended with a Chidori through his chest that day though, so maybe it wasn't the best comparison. It seemed lightning would always remain his least favorite element though, for he saw the telltale sign of her activating her quirk, with green sparks suddenly dancing around her form. It would be futile, however. Maybe before, she would have stood a chance at stopping him, back when his memory was missing entirely and his arsenal was as limited as it could get given who he was. But now. He saw the black tendrils of one of her quirks, Black Whip, shoot towards him from her arm. He raised his own immediately, the tendrils draping themselves over his entire arm, 1 second before she tried to pull him in. When he didn't move an inch, she changed tactics, instead deciding to launch herself towards him. But she had never been faster than him, much less so now. So, by the time she had reached him, he was gone in a yellow flash. The last bit he saw of her being the desperation in her eyes. Waiting had never been his favorite part of the job. It was something that he could do, of course. No one lived as long as he had in that type of career without being to simply do nothing for hours. Patience was a virtue and all of that jazz. Didn't mean he had to like it. You wouldn't have to wait if you just went and did your shit already. Surprisingly, having a fur ball complaining inside his head did little to alleviate the boredom. It wasn't even the first time he heard that complaint today, but he knew he needed to do this properly, or else the chances of too many of them escaping would increase too much. Unless he started showing off more than he wanted to, but that wasn't the time for that, not yet at the very least. Not like he would even have to wait for much longer anyway, given how he finally saw his target leave the building he had been watching over for most of the night. It was easy to identify him, given his bulky form, a result of the guy's quirk, which gave him the appearance of a lion. His eyes narrowed behind his mask, right before he jumped down from his vantage point. It was time to start his night. He was tired. Exhausted actually, with every fiber of his body begging him to finally take a rest, even if it was in the form of passing out in a hole somewhere. But he couldn't. Even as blood slipped through his wounds, as grime and dirt covered the tattered remains of his hero suit, and as his whole form shook with each slight breath he took, he refused to lie down, even for a second. Not even the sight of All for One's body, or at least what was left of it, was enough to calm his beating heart, even though this was supposed to be it, right? He defeated the bad guy, the day was saved, everyone could go back to happier days now, right? But he couldn't, even if he had wanted to, he couldn't. Maybe yesterday he would have. Hell, maybe even just an hour ago, he would have. But right now, even if it was with trembling steps that made his body shudder in pain, he simply kept moving forward. Why? Because he finally remembered. He remembered everything. That was the only reason he was even alive right now. All for One had been expecting a hero in training. He had not been prepared to face a Jinchuriki. And because of that, he needed to keep moving. For how could he rest? How could he, especially when? Good to know this place wasn't able to fix that fucked up head of yours, Uzumaki Naruto. When there was so much work left to do. His target was running. It seemed he had underestimated the man's quirk, given how he was able to sense his approach. It didn't matter that much however, since the man was keeping himself on the rather desolated area of the docks. It was also the zone which hardly had any heroes patrolling it, so it wasn't a surprise that he had chosen to run to such place. It also made his job far easier. So when he jumped down, he did so with nothing but precision, his feet clashing with the back of his target's head with enough force to make him stumble despite his size. Then, a roar of pain left his mouth, courtesy of the kunai he had thrown at his paw. Hand. He wasn't sure of the semantics, but he was sure it was firmly embedded to the wall behind him now. Of course, the first thing his target did next was to try and take out the knife, which gave him plenty of opportunity to lodge his fist right into the target's stomach, with enough force to push the lion man's body against the wall, cracking it on impact. Suffice to say, he was unconscious by the time his body hit the floor. He removed his own mask, just as he started inspecting the unconscious body as best as he could. He wanted his disguise to be perfect, after all, even if he doubted anyone would notice the difference in the first place. Not like they expected someone that was able to change his appearance at will in the first place. He did expect them to grow more than a bit paranoid after tonight though, but that was fine with him. It was actually what he wanted. After all, if they all started to mistrust one another even more than they already did, whatever fragile alliance they had would soon crumble. They would become easy picking for him. But first though, he needed to hide the body. You believe me, right? Please, old man, tell me you believe me. He didn't like how needy he sounded, how desperate his own voice came out, but right now he didn't care. He just needed someone, anyone, that believed in him. Someone that didn't believe in the rumors, someone that didn't give him wary or outright suspicious looks. Someone that didn't believe him to be a traitor, an inside agent with connections to All for One. But whenever he had looked, he had found no one. Not his classmates and friends, not his teachers and mentors, even the civilians that he had sworn to protect. Even when they tried to hide it, he could see it as clear as day in their eyes. The growing mistrust, the lack of confidence. It hurt. It hurt far, far more than what he would like to admit. So in front of the man that had saved him, that had first trusted him and that had set him on his path as a hero, was it so wrong to beg for his vote of trust? I do trust you, young Uzumaki. Toshinori spoke, and he felt as if the weight of the world had finally been lifted from his shoulders. But even so and then, when Toshinori continued, he raised his head so fast he almost got whiplash, a look of utter shock present on his face. Maybe there's something we're missing here. He gave a step back, having a horrible feeling as to where Toshinori was going with this. Maybe he was speaking slowly and carefully, almost as if afraid he would do something if he made him upset. Maybe All for One did something before I found you, something that not even you yourself have realized it with the number of quirks that monster has. We can't be too careful, young Uzumaki. Did he really think he was some sort of sleeping agent or something? Not even Toshinori believed him. Even the closest thing he had to a family thought he was somehow working for a monster like All for One. I'm not a damn villain, All Might. He yelled without even realizing it, his form trembling, with his hands so tightly together into fists that he could feel his knuckles going white. It was only when he saw Toshinori give a step back that he realized he had activated his own quirk without even realizing it. He looked down at his hand, covered in the same crimson cloak he had grown used to wield in the years he had spent training with it. He released a shaky breath, doing his best to steady his own emotions, knowing how much his quirk was affected by them. But he found himself unable. It was all too much, and even Toshinori's obvious look of regret was doing little to soothe him. Naruto, Toshinori started, his voice wavering, but the only thing he could offer him was a glare. He didn't want to listen to anything else right now, not if he was going to be someone putting in doubt who he was. After everything he had done, didn't he at least deserve the benefit of the doubt? You're not being fair, sensei. It was a new voice, however, that managed to stop him from glaring at Toshinori even more, with the owner of said voicing suddenly moving to stand right beside him, from where he could see the defiant look on her freckled face. "Young Midoriya," he heard Toshinori's whisper, with him sounding as surprised as he himself was feeling at the moment. This was supposed to be a private conversation, after all, but it seemed Azuki had found herself with the need of following them. "I know things aren't going well right now," she said, although that was an understatement if he was being honest. But to blame everything on Naruto, no one is being fair anymore, since ain't it even you." And then, her hardened eyes turned to look at him, growing visible softer as her gaze met his own. She even offered him a smile, one that did more to quell his emotions than anything he himself could have done. "I trust him," she said, with nothing but conviction dripping from her tone, in a way that somehow managed to take his breath away, right before her eyes turned to steel and set themselves once more on Toshinori. "And two won't let anyone keep treating him as if he was a villain." And then, without further ado, she took him by the hand before pretty much dragging him away from his speechless Toshinori. Not that he could blame the man though, since he himself didn't even know what to say. To think she would stand up to her idol and mentor for him. If he hadn't already fallen in love with her a long time ago, he would have done so right at that very moment. That much he was certain. The place was a disaster. There was hardly any other way of describing it if she was being honest, for as rude as it sounded, that's what it was. Of course, it wasn't like she wasn't used to such sights, but even so, the number of bodies that were being carried towards the ambulances and even whatever other vehicles they could find, given the sheer number of individuals that needed the medical attention. It was dreadful, even if they were all villains, it honestly looked as if a savage beast had torn them apart one by one. She was sure she saw more than a few missing some of their limbs, but it wasn't a sight that she had tried to dwell over much, for obvious reasons. "Creati." She heard a voice calling out to her, taking her out of her reverie. When she turned, she was greeted by the tired face of the Dragoon hero, Ryukyu, who offered her a small smile and gentle nod. "Ryukyu-san." She greeted back, her eyes leaving Ryukyu's form for just a moment as another injured villain was dragged past them, the smell of blood washing over her nose as they did. "What happened here?" She ended up asking, not only because of the sheer mayhem happening around her, but also because she had been personally called out of her patrol by the hero standing in front of her. The answer she got though was a sigh from Ryukyu, one that felt too heavy for someone as young as her. "That's what we're trying to find out," she explained, right before nodding to a massive hole on the side of the building that was apparently ground zero of whatever disaster had hit this place. "And I was hoping you could help me with that, actually." She frowned in wonder, for she had assumed that the reason she had been called had been to help with her quirk, yet, as she followed Ryukyu, a growing sense of unease started growing in her stomach, one that only grew stronger the moment they entered the building by using its newly created opening. For seemingly, she had not been the only one called here. "Todoroki-san." She called out as they walked towards him, but he showed no reaction to her voice. No, instead, his eyes remained fixed in one place, one of the walls of the building, to be precise. And when she followed his gaze, she understood immediately why his attention was locked onto that place. "We interrogated the few conscious guys we found," Ryukyu explained, but now her voice sounded distant in her ears. "They all seemed to describe the same individual, the one responsible of interrupting their meeting, so to speak." Her eyes remained fixed on the claw marks on the wall, however. They were big, and the wall around seemed to have been burned too. It was a peculiar sight, even in a world full of different quirks, yet it was one she understood immediately. And she was sure Todoroki had done the same, if not even faster than she had. "Blonde, blue eyes, tanned skin." Ryukyu spoke, and with each sentence she felt as if someone had punched her right in her gut. "Whiskers marks on each cheek and covered in a crimson cloak. They said it was a massacre." She continued in a tone that was both professional and yet sorrowful. "Don't get me wrong, I won't be going around defending these guys, but it's a miracle no one has died yet. Whoever did this wanted to inflict as much pain as humanly possible without outright killing them, and with that description, there's only one person that could have. He wouldn't have." She wasn't able to keep her voice in check any longer, her attention moving swiftly towards a surprised Ryukyu. There's no way he would have us not like that." The pitiful look she received in return did not make things any easier. "Aoi Rozu." But before she could raise her voice once more, it was Todoroki's cold voice that stopped her dead on her tracks, his eyes still glued to the marks on the wall. That's his quirk, he would recognize those marks anywhere. She glared at her former classmate, matching his own seemingly disinterested look. She knew, of course, that he was just being honest, but the feeling of bitterness that was forming in her heart cared little about facts right now. "Then we're missing something." Her voice was sudden, her eyes moving from a stoic Todoroki to a Ryukyu who couldn't even look at her in the eyes anymore. "Something must have happened." We weren't here, those villains could just be lying to try and get sympathy points, or maybe they attacked first and now are just trying to make themselves the victims here. By the end, her breathing was ragged, her gaze lowering to the ground just as a flood of memories filled her head, her eyes getting glassy as both her happiest days and her most shameful moments went through her like a bullet. I refused to doubt him. The whisper that left her lips was a low one, but one that was filled with as much raw emotion as she could muster. Not again, Wall did it already, I refused to do so again. If the situation hadn't been so dire, a part of her would have been proud of actually getting a reaction from someone like Todoroki. However, the flinch that she got from the usually stoic young man only made her bit her lip in frustration. She knew she wasn't being fair and that he regretted what they did just as much as she did, but whenever it came to him, she had to admit, most logical thought process left her nowadays. Are you certain no one was killed? Todoroki's sudden query had Ryukyu chewing on her lips for just a second, just as she rubbed her left arm with her right one. So far, no, although we have more than a few on critical conditions. She explained, her eyes narrowing a bit. If someone had died then we would be having a completely different conversation here. At that point this goes from an act of vigilantism to something far more serious. She understood that much, especially with how things were after the war. Look, you two. Ryukyu's tone suddenly shifted, her professional visage turning into one of honest-looking concern. I didn't call you just to confirm what they were saying. I just wanted to give your group a heads up. There are people on edge out there still, and if this is really Uzumaki then. We'll keep that in mind. Surprisingly though, it wasn't hers that interrupted Ryukyu, but rather Todoroki. Then again, maybe she shouldn't have been surprised, for she wasn't the only one that let their emotions run wild when it came to a certain individual. If that will be all then. Her own remark was as polite as she could muster right now, only earning a tight nod from the Dragoon hero. Feel free to help us with the injured. Once more, it was nothing but exhaustion that slipped through Ryukyu's voice. Suffice to say, we weren't prepared for these many victims. They both nodded, and as they gave the marked wall one last look, they began to move to the outside of the building, where they could actually be of use. One last thing. But before they did so, Ryukyu interrupted them. It seemed she was struggling with what to say, however, but in the end, she only shook her head, right before giving them quite the serious look. From what I've gathered, it seemed he infiltrated this place by taking the appearance of one of their members. I have no idea what's happening with Uzumaki, but it seems like he somehow discovered another quirk. Yo. Name's Naruto, Uzumaki Naruto. Favorite thing in the world. Ramen. Thing I dislike the most. The minutes it takes for ramen to be ready. He declared with a boisterous tone, right before raising his right arm, a tint of crimson enveloping said limb soon after. And my quirk is this. I can cover my body in it, makes me stronger and faster. Can use it in other ways too. You're being way too loud for just an introduction. He heard the weird-looking caterpillar man that was supposed to be their teacher mumble, but he decided to ignore the comment. Today was his first day of school, and no one was going to ruin that one. Are those whiskers marks part of your quirk too? He heard one of his classmates ask, it was the cute girl with pink skin and black eyes. She was giving him a grin, one that he returned pretty much immediately, just as he rubbed his cheek slightly. No idea. He answered honestly, only earning a pout in response. It was hard to know that kind of stuff when he barely remembered anything in the first place, but that's something he was going to admit on his first day. Wait, weren't you one of the people that took down the zero-pointer? This time it was a guy with red hair and sharp teeth the one that spoke, and he could have sworn he saw his eyes sparkle just a bit. Dude, that was so manly. That thing was massive. He chuckled in response, most of the class now looking at him with different degrees of shock, but as much as he liked the attention, he also knew that he needed to set things straight first. I was just playing distraction actually. He said with a nod, right before pointing to the seat behind him with his thumb. If you want to talk to the one that actually blew the thing to smithereens, then that's Izuki over here. He then turned slightly, regarding the seemingly frozen girl with a grin, although if she was in that state because it was her turn to introduce herself, or because she now had most the class's attention on her, he couldn't say. Most likely both, he supposed. Come on Izuki, your turn. He tried to take her out of her shocked state by poking her on her head, with the result being immediate as Izuki suddenly stood completely straight, her arms glued to her sides and cold sweat going down her brow. And my name is Midoriya Izuki. He had to give her credit there, at least she hadn't stuttered out every word. And nice to meet you everyone. The questioning looks he got right after only made him laugh a bit more while scratching the back of his head. The girl could destroy a massive robot with a punch, but she acted like a deer in front of highlights when just introducing herself to a new class. Oh well, baby steps he supposed. We need to tell everyone. She heard him declare as such, her eyes that had been set on the peaceful waters surrounding the dock, now giving Todoroki a side glance, right before she looked down with a pained expression. "Do you really think it was him?" she asked, fearing the answer as soon as the words left her lips. In her mind, there was still no way the man she had known for 3 years to be responsible of what she had seen today. It was just impossible, it had to be a mistake, she was certain of that. "What I think," Todoroki started, and even now she could hear the deep frustration in his voice, "is that you were right before. We're missing something, a key piece that makes this make sense. Uzumaki would never do something like this otherwise, I think anyone that knew him could agree on that." To his words she could only give a grateful nod, with a calming sigh leaving her lips right after. It was good to know she wasn't the only one that thought the same. And again, she doubted anyone from their former class would dare to think otherwise in the first place. "But you're right." She followed his words with an admission of her own. "Everyone else is going to find out sooner or later. Don't think they can keep something as big as this hidden for too long." After all, even ignoring the sheer amount of people involved into this mess, the fact that it was a gathering of former League of Villains members, she didn't envy Ryukyu even one bit. It was as she had said, after all, for even if taking out such people from the streets was definitely a good thing, the fact that it had been done as an act of vigilantism, especially given just how brutal it had been, she knew actions were going to be taken, and that keeping it away from the public would be outright impossible. Especially with the Hero Public Safety Commission's newly found interest in looking as transparent as possible. Which meant the time they had right now to do their own investigation was of essence. That was probably why Ryukyu had given them the heads up in the first place. Although whether she had done so out of gratitude or guilt, she wasn't sure right now. And that was ignoring that last bit of info that they had learned. Midoriya is not going to take it well. Todoroki's sudden comment was enough to almost make her shudder by just the sheer mental picture alone. After all, if she herself tended to let her emotions run wild when it came to him, then Midoriya was on a whole different level. She could already imagine her flying over here as soon as she was made aware of what they had learned, even though she was on the opposite end of the country right now. Then again, once everyone else learned about this too. It seemed Class 3A's reunion was happening sooner than expected. Really? He couldn't help but to wonder with a chuckle, just as he lifted the girl by the back of her hoodie. 1 second later and she would have face planted against the floor in quite the painful fashion. "Sorry," Azuki mumbled out, which only made him give her an eye roll. You would think after spending most of the year training for this moment, she would have grown a bit more confident, especially now that she had not only a quirk, but Old Man All Might's quirk of all people. IG got a bit distracted. Probably by overthinking stuff. His comment made her freeze on the spot, which meant he had hit the nail on the head. "Izuki, come on, I'm telling you you're going to nail this, really." But I've only practiced with it for a month." Her voice had a slight waver, which made his eyes soften in response. "But everyone else have been using their quirks for years and we don't know what the exam is going to be, so what if you're just being silly now." He stopped her by flicking her on the nose. "The old man knows you can do this, and I do too. You're the only one with any doubts about this. So come on." He continued as he raised his right fist with a grin on his face. "Let's show them what we got." He saw her expression turn into a surprised one, her eyes slowly going from his face to his raised fist, right before her face turned into one filled with sheer determination, a sight that fitted her far more than her usual nervous expression, if he was being honest. So when her fist met his, he couldn't help the way his grin widened a bit more. UA is not ready for us, believe it." He also wasn't able to hold himself back from putting his arm around her, half hugging the now beet red spluttering girl. "We're going to ace this thing, and then we will wait. Izuki, don't pass out on me, the exam hasn't even started yet." "Are you absolutely certain about this, Endeavor?" He spoke with nothing but seriousness, for what he'd just heard was not something that should be discussed lightly. "I see," but the response he got from the other end of the call only made him run a hand through his face, while an ever-growing feeling of shame was quick to grow from his chest. "I'll be the one to tell her then." And with that, he finished the call, but his body didn't move even a bit after. No, instead he just sat there, his sunken eyes glued to the floor, his thoughts going back to the one student he had failed in more ways than one. His greatest regret, truly. Only being matched by his inability to stop all for one back in his prime. "Sensei." The voice that called out to him though only made him release a shuddering breath. He knew this next conversation was going to be hard and that it would bring back old wounds. Honestly, if she even lashed out, he knew he would have deserved it too. Young Midoriya. But that didn't stop him, for he knew that if someone had the right to know, it was her. "We need to talk, it's important." She gave him a worried look, to which he could only offer a tense smile in return. "It seems we found a lead." He spoke slowly. "Back in Tokyo, it's about Naruto." The way he saw her eyes widen and the myriad of emotions that coursed through those green orbs, it pained him, it truly did. He was a failure as a teacher in more ways than once. But if he could start making amends now then, nothing was going to stop him. Nor the young woman in front of him. Well, that guy's he spoke with annoyance while glaring at the retreating blonde. Seriously, you helped save his sorry ass and he can't even muster a thank you or something. That's just how Kaken is. Izuki's response wasn't helping much either, but he could only grunt in response. She was already looked as downtrodden as one could get, so he didn't want to pile up more on her by complaining even more. He still had a few things to say, however. Those guys, the heroes I mean. Now it was frustration what was slipping through his voice. They weren't being fair with you. You helped a lot, even if they didn't want to admit it. Oh really? He finally got her to actually look at him instead of keeping her eyes glued to the floor. He offered her a grin while moving his hands to the back of his head. Yeah. I get they didn't want a civilian going in like that, but you definitely helped there, Midoriya. He truly believed that, for even if she hadn't stopped the slime villain by herself, the time she brought had been enough for the old man to do his thing. You were a hero today, alright. His words came from the heart, for there was no other way to describe what he had seen today. Today, you were a hero, Midoriya, and I don't care what the old man said, if someone can be a hero, that's you, quirk or not. He had disagreed fundamentally with what the old man had said to the girl in front of her early on the day, and now that he had seen her in action, willing to throw herself in danger just for the sake of helping someone else, even though she had looked terrified and had no way of defending herself. Today, Midoriya Izuki had gained his admiration, that much was for certain. Wait, why are you crying? What he didn't expect though, was for her to suddenly burst out in tears, with sobs leaving her shaking body, just as she slowly kneeled on the ground. Midoriya. You okay there, buddy? So long he was barely able to hear her whispers, but even so he still felt his heartstring being pulled by the broken tone of her voice. I wanted to hear that for so long. He could only look to the side, wanting to at least give her a bit of privacy in what was obviously a vulnerable moment for her. He could only wonder what had brought this on, however. Of course, he knew that being rejected by one's idol could hurt a lot, but this definitely felt like way more than just that. The old man had said that quirkless people didn't have it easy, but surely it couldn't be that bad, right? Well said, young Uzumaki. It was a sudden boisterous voice that made him turn around in surprise, seemingly not only getting his attention, but Midoriya's too. Of course, it was a voice that they recognized quite well. Old man. They all might. Young Midoriya, there's something I need to say to you, so I hope you can hear out this old hero's request. Chapter 1. Decisions. Did you really come here to gloat, Uzumaki? She asked through gritted teeth, her own voice more like a hiss than anything else at the moment. It was a miracle she was alive right now, let alone being awake, so in the grand scheme of things, the pain she was feeling right now was little compared to the alternatives, she supposed. It still hurt like all hell though, which she supposed came in hand when someone made you blow up from the inside. And while he technically wasn't responsible of that, she still found herself glaring at the newcomer, who had seemingly decided to sneak into her hospital room in the middle of the night. She, of course, expected some sort of reaction from her words. She knew enough about him to expect some sort of remark in return, probably some sort of loud declaration or an honest but dumb comment. She had actually grown used to those, considering the amount she had heard every time they fought. To think she had been bested by such a knucklehead. What she got though, made her eyes narrow immediately, for whoever was slowly walking towards her bed was not the Uzumaki Naruto she had fought. The one that had bested her, just to then try and save from the consequences of allying herself with All for One. Someone that she could consider, honest to whatever god was out there, if any, a real hero. But instead, what she had in front of her had her instincts telling her that she was in danger, that he was dangerous. It was an oppressive feeling, one that even made it hard to breathe. The pressure that only disappeared when her eyes finally met his blue ones, his gaze going down, just as air finally returned to her lungs. What the hell was that? Sorry, even his voice sounded different, it was more mellow, like a low rumble. Force of habit, I think. And for a moment, his gaze looked lost, aimed at a corner of the room. It lasted for just 1 second, however, before he set his eyes on her once more, a smile now present on his lips. It was a fucked up smile though, almost as if belonging to someone that hadn't smiled once in his life and was now trying it for the first time. Suffice to say, it looked more than wrong in someone like Uzumaki's face. I didn't come here to pick a fight or anything. He spoke, his eyes sweeping through the room in a quick fashion, before zeroing on her again. I came here to help, in fact. Help? She couldn't stop herself from wondering out loud, even if just stalking was enough to send another wave of pain through her body. Help with what, exactly? His response though? He slowly took out what looked like a dagger, with 3 ends on one side and some sort-of text written on the handle of it. "I have an offer for you, Lady Nagant." He hasn't moved at all yet. That question sprung her into action, her body rolling on the floor below her just before she adjusted her position, the gun that was her quirk now being aimed at the person that had somehow managed to catch her off guard. And again, that fact alone meant it could only be one person. "You're going to take someone's eye out with that thing one of these days." But even though he had her quirk aimed directly at his head, the blonde in front of her still had the gall to simply laugh in her face. It was moments like this when she felt the most like going back to how they met and shoot off that smile of his from his face. "Maybe if you stop sneaking up on me." Truly, the fact that he was somehow able to get close to her without her detecting him was not something she enjoyed, to say the least. What happened to the idiot that had decided eating a bullet through the chest was a sensitive idea if it meant getting on close quarters with her. "I'm just keeping you on your toes." He shot back with a shrug, a smirk now present on his lips. "We wouldn't want you going all rusty in this time of peace, kinda." She could only snort at his words, knowing well that everything he had just said was nothing but bullshit. Has he really not left his hiding spot at all? The mirth that had been present in his voice disappeared in less than a second however, his eyes seemingly now glued to nothing as he looked to the side, but she knew he was looking at the direction she herself had been carefully watching over just a few minutes prior. "Not even for a bit." She replied just as she deactivated her quirk. "You definitely got him scared though. I've seen him peeking through the window far more often now." "I see," he answered, his narrowed eyes still looking at the same direction. She remained studying his face however, another of her many attempts at trying to figure out what was going through that head of his. You would think that after 2 years of being associates it would have become easier, but if there was one thing she had learned, it was that Uzumaki Naruto was very good at hiding both his thoughts and emotions. "Yes, I need to ruffle some more feathers, then." His words made her frown, for she knew very well what he meant by that. Not only that though, but the nonchalant way in which he said it, almost as if talking about the weather, reminded her of the type of person she was dealing with. Uzumaki Naruto was dangerous. Far more than what they had told her 2 years ago. How he had been able to hide this part of himself while being a UA student, she did not know. She had made a deal with the devil once already, when All for One had sent her after the man in front of her. Only to make another one with the person she had tried to kill. "The heroes are going to come for you if you keep up this pace." She still felt like she had to remind him of that however, even as he started walking away from her. "I could use the spar." But he only waved away her words, not even stopping for a second. Then, in front of her eyes, he simply disappeared, leaving nothing but wind and leaves. She could only sigh once more, her quirk activating as she did. Her days of dealing with dangerous individuals were far from over. "So you're going with that Torino guy?" he asked as he scooted closer to Izuki, peeking at the sheet of paper in her hand. "Why yeah." She answered with slight stiffness, her own gaze glued to that same paper in her hand. "I think he can help me the most since he even T-trained All Might." He made a humming sound, getting her logic, but also wondering just what kind of man was the person that had trained the old man. He had never met the man, after all, and the old man sure acted weird whenever he thought about this Gran Torino guy. And by weird he meant scared shitless. What about you?" Izuki followed him up with a question of her own. Did you decide to do it?" "Ooh, help me." A pair of pink arms suddenly sneaked around his neck from behind his seat, the owner of said arms pressing her cheek to his own, just as she cried obvious crocodile tears. "Yeah, Momo is bullying me." "I am not bullying you, Ashido-san." An indignated remark followed right after, just as he saw Yaoi Rozu stalking towards their seat. "I just think you need to review each option carefully before making such an important decision." "Help me." Mina's response was whispered to his ears only, with her pouting visage making him almost laugh, right before he winked at her. Fortunately, Yaoi Rozu couldn't see that last bit from her spot. "You already decided where you going, Yaoi Rozu?" he asked as he craned his neck back so that he could see their class vice president properly. Well, that's he could only look on confused as Yaoi Rozu seemingly stumbled over her words, almost as if trying to do her best Izuki impression. He wasn't used to that, to say the least, especially since it had only started after the sports festival. "That was weird, right? Iwabami, the snake hero, is who I chose." She was finally able to answer him after sighing slightly however. "I believe Kendo-san from the other class is choosing her too." "Kendo's cool, so at least you won't get bored with her around," he said as he remembered one of the few persons he actually knew from class 1B. "I'm going with Selkie." Suddenly, Tsu declared with a ribbit from her own spot on the dorm's living room. "Since my quirk can be used for underwater missions." That makes sense, he heard Izuki comment to his left, to which he could only nod. Definitely made sense with how Tsu's quirk worked. "What about you, Naruto?" It was Shiro the one that asked as he walked by, a grin present on his face. You got a ton of offers, can't imagine actually having to look through all of those. He actually groaned at that, remembering how Aizawa had told him that he should, at the very least, check on every offer, even when his recommendations had been clear. If you need help. Yaoyorozu walked closer to his seat after that though, where Mina still refused to let him go. I could help you with reviewing them. Better you than me, Mina grumbled into his ear once more, just before she whined a bit as she poked her cheek with his finger. Actually, I already picked mine. He said in a triumphant tone as he puffed his chest out, with the look of his friends going from surprised to curious extremely quick. Really? The first one to ask was Izuki, to which he could only nod. He was going to tell her later, but since the topic was brought up, he might as well just say it already, right? Is it Endeavor like Todoroki? Or maybe Best Jeanist like Bakugo? After his words, Mina had made a move so that she was actually sitting on the couch, on the seat to his right, her eyes sparkling with interest. Come on, tell us. Actually, she came and gave me the offer personally. He explained as he scratched his chin. It was weird as heck, and she kept talking about teaching me the real stuff that actually matters, whatever that means, but hey, she seemed strong, so sure, why not? Maybe we shouldn't have let you pick by yourself. Yaoyorozu's deadpan tone might be low, but he was still able to hear it, making him pout in response. Izuki nodding alongside it did not help his mood. He could pick his internship just fine. Wait, so what's her name? Sure you didn't get scammed by accident? Shiro snickered at his face, which only made him huff right before taking out a piece of paper from his pocket. Urko, the rabbit hero. He read her name out loud, having no idea if she was well known or not. You guys know her, why are you all looking at me like that? Even Izuki had a flabbergasted look on her face. Why, what happened? Did he somehow pick someone weird? Are you absolutely sure about it? Positive. Even those from his class said it was his quirk. There was someone else that she felt deserved an explanation, a heads up before things turned even more complicated than they already were. She knew, of course, that a lot of people would say this was a bad move, not only because of the reputation of the woman in front of her, but also because of how personal she knew things could get whenever it came to this woman and Uzumaki. Said woman was now too busy looking at a wall in her apartment, but even from the other side of the room, she could tell how she was gritting her teeth together in sheer frustration, with nothing but fire showing in her gaze. What are you going to do about it? She had to ask, even if she already knew the answer before she had even told her. A risky move, she knew, but she also felt that she needed this. After all, Uzumaki's disappearance had hurt Mirko far more than what most realized, maybe even herself. And if this was something that could bring closure, then. Besides, at least like this there wasn't a danger of her going ballistic if she knew no one had told her sooner. Mirko's response though? She shot her a glare, her mechanical limb pressed tightly into a fist, right before an honest-to-God growl left her mouth. I'm going to beat the shit out of him. Chapter 2. Vigilante. I'll admit I didn't think you had it in you, Uzumaki, he spoke through ragged breath, his body aching in pain. His gaze moved low for a second, more specifically at the prone bodies that were supposed to be his bodyguards. But instead of that, they were now nothing but corpses, with blood surging from their sliced necks as pools of red liquid were being formed right below them. He would have clicked his tongue at the quality of the men he had at his disposal if the situation wasn't so dire. Especially since the one responsible for their deaths was now lifting him by the neck, making enough pressure so that breathing was becoming hard by the second. Things have changed, Jiren. To think he would be caught in such position by a damn brat of all people. But then again, it was hard to still consider him just a kid after what he had just seen him do. Kids didn't go around killing others with such easiness. And that was excluding the whole dragging around all for one's mangled corpse for the world to see shtick from a few weeks ago. It had been a rough time to be on this side of the law, to say the least. Especially now that he had Uzumaki manhandling him like a damn toy. You can relax, though. And although his voice was still as cold as a glacier, at the very least the pressure in his neck lessened slightly. You aren't going to die today. He would have preferred to not be suddenly thrown to the other side of the room too though, but his survival instinct made him only able to spit to the ground right before glaring up at the approaching Uzumaki. What do you want in? He growled out, wondering why he was still alive then in the first place. He had been able to avoid the heroes as they started cleaning up whatever remnants of opposition were left after All for One's death, just to then be caught by Uzumaki of all people. He wasn't naive, he knew he was still only alive because he wanted him alive. But why? Long story short, I could use someone with your contacts, so to speak. He spoke, even going as far as to spin the damn kunai he had used to kill his men. In other words, you now work for me, Jiren. Tempting offer, surely. And what do I even gain from it? Business was his life, making profitable deals his passion. If Uzumaki thought he would do this for free just because he was threatening his life, then he was going to leave severely disappointed. Uzumaki's response was to crouch in front of him, close enough that he felt more than a little tempted to try and reach his head with his hand in order to use his quirk. The way he stabbed the knife on the ground as soon as he moved his arm slightly though, stopped him from acting that idea out. Uzumaki kept looking at him in silence, almost as if trying to find something in his face, with how intently he was being looked at by him. And it seemed he found whatever he was looking for, considering the next words that left his lips. In return I will make you the king of the underworld. You're attracting way too much attention, you brat. He voiced out, feeling the beginnings of a massive headache on his temple. Everyone is getting restless and that makes me restless. That was the point, Jiren. Of course, his words fell on deaf ears as the damn blonde that was his boss simply shrugged as if nothing was wrong with the world. What part of I need to make some people nervous didn't you get? It also didn't help that he was currently slurping down some instant ramen of all things. The part where it included me on that list. With that he simply sat back on his seat, a deep sigh leaving his mouth. He didn't know why he even bothered to be honest, not like much he would say could change his boss's mind in the first place. Still, it felt good to be able to vent without fear of getting killed. Even though this type of meetings were honestly the most dangerous part of their collaboration, so to speak. After all, if anyone on this side of the law were to learn he was working alongside not only a former hero student, but also the very same person that was right now hunting criminals, as if they were rats, well. To say he would be ruined would be putting it lightly. Still, the light at the end of the tunnel was promising, at least far more promising than his previous endeavors with the League, so he couldn't complain that much. I didn't come here to just hear you complain, I hope you know that. He did, of course, know that, but too many people were trying to find information about the new Vigilante going around, and having to act as if he knew nothing got a bit tiresome after a while. I just need to know if you have anything worthwhile so I can be on my way. And he did, indeed, have some good info to show. But it was also a bit more complicated than the previous info he had given out. What is it? It seemed the slight hesitation showed on his face however, given Uzumaki's narrowed gaze. He even stopped eating. I don't keep you around so you can hide stuff from me. That's the opposite of your job, in fact. There's one gathering happening soon. He grunted out while taking out the cigar out of his mouth. Crazy bastard saying that it's time to strike back again, that the war hasn't ended, that now is our time, blah blah, the usual drill they say to gather more people around them. What's the big deal then? Uzumaki's question came with a frown. If it's just more idiots trying to pick what All for One started then. It's not All for One they're ganging around. Then, he grinned, already expecting a reaction from what he was about to say. But rather his very much still alive air. As soon as those words left his lips, it was as if Uzumaki became a completely different person. Gone was the brat that would tick him off with his attitude, and instead there sat the man that he knew could very well kill him before he even realized what was going on. It was in the eyes. He didn't know how, but Uzumaki's eyes spoke of someone that had seen far more death than any sane person should. He wouldn't call himself an expert, but when someone lasted as much in the underworld as he had done so, they tended to pick those kinds of tells. It helped with surviving, since that way one could avoid making deals with that kind of nutjobs. Sadly, he was now tied to one of them. Such was his shitty luck, he guessed. And it took you this long to tell me? Uzumaki voiced out in a cold whisper, and he could have sworn for a moment he saw his eyes flashing red. They weren't getting much traction, so I thought they were all bark and no bite. He answered just as a bit of cold sweat went down his brow. I'm sure they still are, but he got rather popular after they started bragging about a relic of old they found. Relic? Nomu. It was a simple sentence, but one that also carried a lot of weight, so he wasn't surprised when Uzumaki's eyes narrowed even further. I don't know if they really have some connection with that brat Shigaraki or not, but the Nomu thing they're even willing to show it just to prove they aren't just talking shit. And with that he pushed an envelope to the blonde, who grabbed as soon as it reached his end of the desk. No more words were exchanged between them as Uzumaki swiftly grabbed the file before raising from his seat, his cup of noodles now forgotten on the desk and his eyes glued to the envelope as if it was the most interesting thing in the world. One last thing. But still, he wasn't the best at what he did for nothing, so there was still a bit more that he had learned. These idiots, they haven't exactly been subtle about it, maybe because they really have a Nomu and feel safer with it. I don't know, but I do know that it isn't exactly a well-kept secret around. You think the heroes already know? Uzumaki seemed to catch on what he was saying immediately, to which he could only nod. If you go there, I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't only society's rejects that you will be facing. Another grin formed on his lips, for just imagining the disaster that would be such all-out brawl was amusing to him. It wasn't that amusing to his boss, however, who simply stared at him for an extra second before disappearing in a yellow flash. His eyes swept through the entire room as he finished walk down the stairs, his gaze only stopping once he saw the mop of spiky blonde hair he was looking for. He walked towards his target, the ruckus of the living room growing larger as he walked closer. He wasn't by himself, after all, rather the blonde had quite the amount of their classmates gathered around him, most of them in fact, who were seemingly enjoying whatever he was blabbering about. He was the outgoing friendly type, that much was obvious to him, although he himself didn't see the point in playing friends like that. They were here to grow and learn to become proper heroes, nothing else, yet he seemed to like and waste his time playing like this. His gaze wandered slightly to the blonde's right, where the ever-present figure of Midoriya sat. They were almost attached by the hip, so her presence wasn't a surprise in the slightest. In fact, the only reason he even looked at her was because she was also of slight interest for him. If his current target wasn't Uzumaki Naruto, then he most likely would have approached her, rather than him. But after what he had seen during the USJ incident, his interest had become more than clear. Uzumaki. So, when he finally reached the group, he didn't waste any time in calling him out, with the sounds that their classmates were making stopping immediately, as they all set their eyes on him. Since he had approached him from behind, Uzumaki and Midoriya were the last one that turned their attention to him, with Midoriya seemingly looking confused, while Uzumaki was all smiles as usual. Yo, Todoroki. Maybe he just couldn't help it. For it seemed Uzumaki was the only one that hadn't realized he wasn't here for games. We were about to bring out the cards, want to join us? I'm not here for that. He interrupted him immediately, not really caring about what he was about to say. I only came here to tell you something. Uzumaki's grin finally faltered, instead turning a frown. I believe I'm the strongest in the class. He started, simply stating what he thought of as a fact, not really caring how their classmates started frowning at his words. But I also believe you're strong. Strong enough to even have All Might's attention. You would have to be blind to not realize that the #1 hero of the country had been paying special attention to not only Uzumaki, but to Midoriya as well. This is why, during the sports festival, I will defeat you, Uzumaki. He finally declared, his eyes narrowing a bit further as he did. You can take this as my declaration of war. Come on man, there's no need to act like that. Instead of Uzumaki though, it was Kirishima the one that spoke out as he stood up from his seat. Yeah, aren't you being a little unfair? Now it was Jiru who spoke, even as his eyes remained focused on the still frowning Uzumaki. I didn't come to UA to waste time by playing games. He declared in order to silence their complaints, his words finally getting another reaction from Uzumaki, for the next thing he knew, the blonde was now standing right in front of him, a frown still present on his face. That movement made a bunch of the class jump into action, with Iida and Kaminari moving quickly to stand between them, while Midoriya and Ishido had their hands on Uzumaki's shoulder, seemingly in an attempt of calming him down. Did they think they would start fighting right now? That wasn't the reason he had come here, he just wanted to make his feelings clear so Uzumaki could prepare. There wasn't a point if he was caught off guard, after all. But if his words made Uzumaki angry enough to start something right here, he also wasn't going to back down. What he got from Uzumaki though, was the complete opposite, for right after the frown of his face disappeared, instead being replaced by a toothy grin. That's not going to happen. Then, Uzumaki suddenly declared with nothing but confidence dropping from his voice. You're not beating me, Todoroki. I can promise you that. His words made him scoff, his eyes narrowing even more. Was Uzumaki underestimating him that much? As good as his quirk was, it wasn't going to beat his eyes, wasn't that obvious? Or maybe he was just delusional. Because I'm going to give it my all. Uzumaki continued as his grin widened, but his eyes told him he was being nothing but serious at the moment. And I refuse to lose to someone that's half-assing everything by not using their entire quirk. His words made his eyes widen for just a second, before a glare set itself in his eyes once more, just as more of their classmates moved to stand between them. He didn't care though, so he simply turned without saying anything else, his feet dragging him towards his room once more. He had said his piece, and now he was even more motivated than before. It wouldn't be just Endeavor, but Uzumaki too, he would show them that he didn't need to use that cursed fire to win. He was sure of that. Reports from every hospital. There seems to be an increase in new surge of interest about Vigi. There's someone out there taking out the trash and I see no problem with. The police, alongside the HPSC, offered no comments when asked about the identity of the new. Could you pick a fucking channel already, Raccoon Eyes? It was, of course, Bakugo who growled out in obvious annoyance, his yell only making Ishido blow a raspberry at him. Not my fault every dumb channel is talking about it. He knew what she was referring to, and so did Bakugo, judging by how his frown became even uglier somehow. Then again, considering how the mood of the room dropped immediately, it wasn't like they were the only ones that knew what Ishido was talking about. Sorry, she even went as far as to apologize in a subdued manner, only making Bakugo click his tongue before looking at the side in what seemed like frustration. It was impressive, a part of him had to admit, how just a few words were enough to bring down what was almost 20 individuals in one go. Suddenly, it was as if everyone was afraid of talking next, as if the next few words that anyone could muster would only end up making things worse somehow, which they might, all things considered. Still, it wasn't like they could all just sit in silence around his living room, that wasn't why they had gathered here, after all. It really has to be him, huh? And in the end, it was Uraraka who spoke first, with a grimace etched painfully on her face and her eyes growing watery. There's really no going around that, right? We've seen the traces left after the attacks. Shoji followed up in a subdued tone, to which he could only nod. It's hard to argue against that. And that's ignoring the description the victims keep giving. Now it was Jiru who spoke as she kept her gaze locked to the floor, her voice cracking a bit. The ones that he didn't leave in a coma, at least. At that he saw most of his classmates flinch, but he couldn't find fault in what she had said. It was the truth, after all. Those attacks had been brutal, and as Ryukyu had said, on the scene of the first attack, it was only a miracle that no one had died. Yet. A treacherous part of his mind thought, but he quickly shook his head right after. Uzumaki was many things, but a killer he was not, he knew that much. It didn't change the fact that there had been a series of attacks on groups of people, all seemingly with connections to the now disbanded League of Villains, and while he himself had not been there to see every crime scene, some of his former classmates had, just like him and Yaoi Rozu did before. And they had reported the exact same thing as they had. Uzumaki's quirk was pretty unique after all, and as Jiru had said, they couldn't just ignore the description people kept giving about the culprit. Guys, come on. It was Kaminari, the one that stood up from his seat, an incredulous look on his face and a challenging tone on his voice. This is Naruto we're talking about, there's no way he could have done this. It sounded like lousy reasoning, but frankly he couldn't help but to agree with him. They knew Uzumaki better than anyone, and this just wasn't him. We think then, Yaoi Rozu spoke, her eyes meeting his own for just a second before nodding, to which he simply returned the gesture. That there's more to this that we know. For Naruto-kun to be doing this, there must be an explanation, a reasoning behind it that we just don't know yet. Her voice was dripping with conviction, and he could easily see how most of their former class seemed to get a bit of their spirit back after hearing that, with some even nodding alongside it. After all, it was the only thing that made sense, right? That would be logical. Iida's tone was as serious as it was hopeful, but it was followed by his brow furrowing. But how would we even learn about it in the first place? That's easy. Kirishima stood up too, with a motivated glint shining in his eyes. We get him to tell us, that's how. But how? Asui, as blunt as ever, was quick to follow up, even though there were tears at the corners of her eyes. We don't know where he is, or where he's going to be next. In the end, that was the main conundrum at hand. It didn't matter what they wanted to do if they didn't even know where to find Uzumaki in the first place. Then again, maybe that wasn't right. They had an idea where he could be, judging by his current activities, but knowing where those kinds of gatherings would happen was another matter altogether. Honestly, the fact that Uzumaki was seemingly aware of when they were happening was a most concerning fact too. We'll get our chance in a few days. Someone suddenly declared, with his, alongside everyone else's attention, going directly at the newcomer. Then, we can get Naruto-kun back. Hagakure, he called out at the flying set of gloves, boots and small emerald pin that rested on her hair. Did you pick my lock? That was the only explanation, given that she had just arrived and he most certainly hadn't gone to open the door of his apartment. You need better security, Todoroki-kun. She said in an upbeat tone as she walked closer towards them. You don't want any weird people going in without permission. Excuse me, mademoiselle, but what is this about us having a chance in a few days? Of course, Hagakure's words weren't forgotten by anyone if the sudden intensity in everyone's eyes was anything to go by. There's going to be a raid in a few days. Hagakure continued her explanation, her tone becoming more serious as she did. It's being kept on a tight leash right now. They don't want this info leaking out to anyone not actually participating, which is exactly what I'm doing right now. Perks of being the one that got this info in the first place. That's probably why Midoriya-chan isn't here. Hagakure continued without missing a beat. Endeavor is probably explaining the situation to her right now. It had been weird, of course, for Midoriya of all people to say she couldn't attend at the last second. If someone would have been here first, given the motive behind their gathering, it would have been Midoriya after all, but if what Hagakure said was true then. Both Endeavor and Deku. Sato's tone of confusion was understandable. Are they really bringing the big guns just like that? Indeed, not only his father, who was still the #1 hero of the country, but even Midoriya too. There had to be something else going on. Maybe, it had to do with Uzumaki himself. There's a Nomu involved. Her sudden reveal though, was enough to make his whole body go tense. And Nomu, of all things. Even now, years after the war had ended. And then Nomu. Minetta's sudden quiver wasn't exactly surprising. They, probably better than most, knew how dangerous a Nomu could be. I thought they were all gone. Apparently not. Tokoyami's voice was solemn. And if one of those monsters is involved then, it is not surprising that both Endeavor and Midoriya are participating. And Naruto too, most likely Ajiro continued Tokoyami's trail of thoughts, voicing the conclusion he had already reached. But how are we getting there in the first place? The idea wasn't perfect though, something that Zero pointed out quickly. If this is really kept on a need-to-know basis then, it isn't like we can just walk in there. I'll talk with Endeavor. He declared, earning everyone's attention. Perhaps I can get him to include me in the operation. It wouldn't be easy, and he particularly didn't like being indebted to his father, but if that was what had to be done then, he would do it without regrets. As for the rest of us, Yaoi Rozu seemed to be deep in thought as she spoke. Perhaps, we could patrol the areas close to the raid's location. That way, if something were to happen and backup was needed, we would be the first ones that would arrive. It wasn't the best of moves, that much he knew, but it wasn't like they had many other options left, at least that weren't outright illegal. At the very least, it seemed like more fire had returned so everyone's eyes now that a plan had been formed, even if the chance of succeeding were low. They didn't even know if Uzumaki would be there in the first place. But just like them, he honestly couldn't help but to hope. Friends wasn't something he had many of, after all, so if there was a chance of seeing the person he considered his first true friend then. What will we do? Suddenly though, it was Koda's soft words that tore through the growing excitement. If we find him there, what do we do? That was something important to consider though, wasn't it? After all, something told him that Uzumaki wasn't just going to comply if someone tried to stop his ongoing crusade. In that case, if they saw him then. Was a fight just inevitable? After everything they had done to him already, were they really going to fight him now? It seemed he wasn't the only one getting to that conclusion, given the somber atmosphere that was growing among them. What the hell do you mean by that? Bakugo's angry yell though, cut through it all as if it was nothing. I don't know what you losers are going to do, but if I see Uzumaki again, I'm beating his teeth in twice, first for leaving like a fucking idiot and then again for doing this kind of stupid shit. We can worry about other crap after we get him tied to a chair or something. Then, Bakugo's voice went from hot to cold anger, a hiss leaving his lips. So don't you lot dare get involved if you're just going to get in the way by having doubts in the middle of it. Bakugo's words were harsh and careless, but even so he found himself nodding towards him, which got him a nod back. After all, it was something that they all needed to come to terms with. For there was no way they would be able to get Uzumaki back if they faced him half-assedly. Chapter 3. Confrontation. She was panicking. Her eyes were shaking, her gaze aimed low as the realization of how difficult things were going to be started to truly set in. Of course, she knew that she had a target painted on her back. How could she not with the number of points she now held? Everyone was going to be gunning for her during the next event, that much was obvious. Stealing her points meant an instant pass to the next round, after all. Which meant that, whoever decided to team up with her, would get the exact same treatment. As such, could she really blame everyone else for moving away from her? But she still needed a team, there was no way she could do this next event by herself. What was she supposed to do then? What's with that face? You're on first place, Izuki. You should be smiling instead of frowning like a kicked puppy. Those words however, followed by the feeling of someone draping their arm over her neck, were enough to take her out of her thoughts, with her gaze moving up instantly, her eyes meeting a pair of blue ones, attached to the grinning face of her best friend. Her face felt hotter by the second because of the proximity. It was something that she had been slowly growing used to, given Naruto's tendency to not understand what personal space meant, but she was still far from not feeling embarrassed about it. I need a team, she blurted out in response to his inquiry, her face going down once more, just as quiet mumbles started to leave her lips. Tea time is running out and I don't have a team yet, people are already grouping so that will make things harder, and because of my points, no one is going to want to be on my team and… Hey, you're doing it again. She only snapped out of it after he started snapping his fingers in front of her face, with even the tip of her ears going red in embarrassment at having to be taken out of one of her rants. Sorry. She couldn't help but to apologize, with a chuckle that left him not helping her current embarrassment levels even for a bit. You need to relax. He suddenly said, almost as if they weren't in the middle of one of the most important events they could have as UA students. I mean, how hard can it be to find 2 more people, really? Considering how everyone had treated her after the announcement, she would say pretty hard all things considered. It was only then, however, that his words registered properly in her mind, her wide eyes looking up once more at Naruto, her own expression a mix of incredulity and hope. Why you mean? What? Did you think I was going to let you leave me behind? He answered her silent question with a grin that had her heart fluttering in a way that she didn't know how to handle at the moment. Sorry to disappoint you, but you're not getting rid of me that easily. His words, however, struck her deeply in a way that had her honestly shaking, with her mouth opening and closing as she did the best imitation of a fish that she could muster. And before she knew it, there were already tears swelling up in her eyes. Come on, really? He spoke with a roll of his eyes and a small laugh, his hand moving from around her to her back, right before she felt him rubbing circles on it. I thought we were past the crybaby thing already. Sorry. She apologized once more, only that this time it was between sobs. She tried her best to try and stop the tears from coming out, but they just wouldn't stop. Baby steps, I guess. Another laugh left Naruto, right before his voice grew louder and full of confidence. Now let's find ourselves a team, Miss First Spot. And even though it was through watery eyes, she still managed to nod at him, every feeling of anxiety she had before now being nowhere to be seen. It was time. He knew it so, which is why he moved from his spot towards the center of the room, the place that had become their base of operation, because of the advantages it offered, namely on how close it was to the target and the vantage point it offered. Everyone. He called out, his tone gruff as his eyes swept over those that would be participating in the mission. As both the oldest and most experienced member of the team, it wasn't much of a surprise that he was the one doing the leading. Of course, there was also the growing concern about certain individual, and given how much notoriety that person's exploits had been amassing, there was not chance that him, as the #1 hero of the country, would not try to solve this matter himself. Especially considering who this individual was. We will start the operation in 20 minutes. He declared, mostly as a reminder than anything else. Everyone already knew their roles, after all, so when they all got into position, coordination would not be a problem in the slightest. It wasn't like he was dealing with amateurs, after all. Everyone here had more than a bit experience in the field. Even his own son, who was probably one of the greenest here present, was still someone he knew he could count. There was one issue with this team, however. It was something that he had been more than aware when it was formed, of course, and it was also something that he knew needed to be addressed once more before the operation started. We all know what our objective today is, so I won't bother with repeating myself. He continued. His tone as serious as he could muster it. However, we all are also aware of the possible complications that today's mission might carry. The tension in the room grew tighter as soon as those words left his lips, and while bringing the mood down before an operation like this was far from ideal, he still needed to be sure of it. To be sure that no one would let their emotions regarding certain blonde to cloud their judgment. It doesn't matter who we face there today, we have a duty as heroes to always to bring them to justice and to not let personal matters interfere with that no matter what. Then, his already sharp eyes turned into a glare as they swept through those gathered once more, his eyes meeting each one of them as he did his best to find any sign that might make things go south if push came to shove. Luckily, he found none. Not from his son, his pride and joy, as Shoto simply gave a sharp note back. Not from the leader of the cats, as Mandalay just gave a solemn nod, obvious sadness in her eyes, but zero amount of doubt. Not from his fellow top 10 hero, as Kamui Wood simply gave an unflinching look, followed by a nod of his own. Not from Invisible, for even though he couldn't actually see her, her body language spoke of someone more than ready to accomplish the mission. And then, his eyes met green. The pair of emerald orbs showing such a myriad of emotions that, for at least that moment, his heart truly went out for the girl. She knew that, out of everyone, she was the one taking it the hardest. But even so, he still got a nod in return, and even if Deku broke the staring match right after, he still knew that, as personal as this was for her, he could still trust Deku to act like the hero she was. If he was being honest, there was only one person here that had him more than a bit on edge. Was I clear, Mirko? He didn't enjoy calling her out personally, but he also knew she was the wild card of the bunch. It was her relationship with Uzumaki, alongside her erratic temper, that had him considering pulling her out of the entire thing more than once. However, it was also said relationship the reason itself he had accepted bringing her along. After all, barring Deku herself, she was arguably the one that knew Uzumaki's combat capabilities the most out of everyone present. No need to jeer your panties in a twist, endeavor. Of course, he had already expected such a biting response from her, so his expression did not change in the slightest. Let's just get this shit over with. Then, Mirko simply gave her back to him in a dismissive manner, causing his eye to twitch slightly in response. It wasn't that he didn't understand her plight completely, for even he had more than a soft spot when it came to that damn blonde. Most of his family did, in fact. And if someone knew what it meant having to face the demons of your past in the battlefield, it was him. Everyone into position, then. With nothing more else to say, he gave the order out, with he himself more than ready to carry out the plan perfectly. Of course, all that carefully planning ended up going through a window when, not even 5 minutes later, a Nomu with a drill on its head suddenly bursted through the side of the building they were going to raid. "Thank you," he spoke softly as they walked side by side, with the sun already setting as they finally decided to go back to the dorms. "For coming here today even though I made you wait outside." "It's cool, I don't mind." Uzumaki's response was a simple shrug, his tone as laid back as ever. "Not like I had anything to do today, anyway." He knew that was a lie. It wasn't that he liked to eavesdrop or anything, but Ishido hadn't been exactly subtle about having to reschedule their date, as she had put it. He didn't bring it up, however, deciding to simply nod in gratitude once more. He didn't want to make things awkward, especially since he was still rather new to the whole actually having a friend thing. "How was she though?" Uzumaki's question was full of curiosity. "You said this was the first time you saw your mom in a while, right?" It was, yes. There was no shame in his answer, nor attempt at hiding his familiar situation. Uzumaki was already pretty aware of it, after all. "She's better, it seems. At the very least, she looked better. The doctor said so too, even though they still can't recommend for her to go back home with us." The humming sound left Uzumaki, and he could see the corner of his mouth turn upward slightly. Had Uzumaki been worried that his meeting with his mother had gone wrong on any way? It seemed so. "She also said," he continued, his tone growing quieter, "that she saw the sports festival on TV and that she was happy to see me giving it my all." That's why he stopped then, prompting Uzumaki to do the same a few seconds later, just as he returned Uzumaki's look of interest with one filled with nothing but steel. "Next year, I won't lose to you again." His words got Uzumaki to blink confusedly at him for just 1 second before his expression turned into a grin, with his blue eyes shining in a way he knew it meant he was approving of what he had just heard. "Oh? Is this another declaration of war that I'm hearing from you, Shodo?" His voice had a slight tease to it, which he knew was related to him throwing back the words he had said before the sports festival had started. Rather than that. He could only shake his head at his past actions. "It's a promise that I'm making not only to myself, but to you as well, Uzumaki." Then, as he raised his hand, it was immediately met with Uzumaki's own in a firm grip, his own eyes never leaving his blue ones, and even though no words were being said, he just knew Uzumaki understood from where he was coming from. But as they started to walk once more, away from the hospital in which his mother resided, there was still one more thing he had to say. "Perhaps, next time, I could introduce you to my mother." And at that moment, a part of him felt proud about actually catching Uzumaki by surprise, given the expression in his face, although said expression slowly turned into a smile, a rather soft one, compared to his usual grins. "I would love that." There were many things going through his head as they went down on the hole that the drill Nomu had made. Most of them had to do with what they were going to face once they reached the bottom of it. After all, obviously something had happened if they had just decided to release the Nomu they had in such a way. The part of him felt bad for Midoriya though, for he could still remember the look of conflict she had sported as his father ordered her to focus on the Nomu alongside Kamui Woods. He knew that if someone wanted to be here, as they kept running closer as to where Uzumaki might be, it was Midoriya, and seeing her struggle with herself as to what to do, even if it had been for just a second, honestly made him feel sorry for her. "Deku and Kamui Woods have already intercepted the Nomu." Those words resounded in his head, courtesy of what he knew was Mandalay's quirk. Right after, he saw his father, who was leading the charge, simply nod to himself, not stopping even for a moment. Knowing that Midoriya was more than capable of dealing with this outside, it meant they could focus on what they were about to face. But even as he steeled himself for what was to come, as they finally reached what seemed to be the bottom of the hole, he still found his eyes widening as the tight tunnel they had been in became an open space, obviously the basement of the building. His shock wasn't because of that though, but rather what he saw inside. First, there were the bodies. Not as many as he had expected, but still a fair share of unconscious people, most of them with their limbs bent in pretty unnatural ways, and probably a few cracked skulls, given the damage done to the floor too. Then, there was the second Nomu. Because apparently, Hagakure had been right about the presence of Nomu, just not the quantity. Not like this other one would be much of an issue though, given that it was pretty clearly dead. At least, if the pillar of what seemed to be earth that it had pierced through its chest as the body rested on the floor was an indication of anything. Then, there were the two individuals still alive and conscious, with one of them crawling back from the other one, and with the info they had received, he knew the one doing the crawling had been the person that had orchestrated this entire reunion on the first place. As for the one walking towards this person, waves of ice erupted from his right side. Their path unobstructed as the attack moved closer to the blonde target. He didn't know if to feel surprised or not that his attack failed however, with the figure barely turning his head around before jumping backwards, leaving a wall of ice between the two men. His focus was entirely on the blonde one though, his entire body growing tense as he finally turned to regard them. And when he did, he had expected a plethora of different sights. Would he see anger in those blue eyes of his? After all, the last time they saw one another, it had been a low point of their friendship, to say the least. Would he see coldness instead? It would be such a surreal look, but perhaps justified after what they made him go though. Would he see nervousness at being caught red-handed in such situation? Maybe, even shame, guilt. Or would he see nothing but bitterness not only aimed at himself, but at heroes as a whole for having treated him as a villain? He got none of that though. Instead, what he got, alongside Endeavor, Mirko and Hagakure, was a grin, followed by a casual wave of his hand. It was a reaction that would have brought more than a few fond memories not only for him, except for a key detail. Yo. It's been a while. That smile did not reach Uzumaki's Naruto eyes. Chapter 4. Conflict. She was surrounded. There's a pretty penny out there for that head of yours, Rabbit. The apparent leader of the cavalry of fuck-ups that had decided to gang up on her, said in probably the sleaziest tone he was able to muster, but the only answer she could offer him was a roll of her eyes. It didn't matter how many times she heard stupid stuff like that, it never got more interesting than the last idiot that thought she wanted to hear whatever monologue he had prepared for the occasion. Seriously, couldn't he just get to the point? She had like 10 other criminals around her just waiting for this guy to finish off. Once I take down a top 10 hero, everyone will start seeing me with respect. I'm sure even the league will ask me to join them. That's why, today I will glah. She was not a patient woman, and this guy had already wasted enough of her time. But seriously, he couldn't have at least handled one kick. She had expected a bit more given how much shit he talked, and yet, one kick to his stomach was enough to send him crumbling down, knocked unconscious. Such was her disappointment that she even huffed in annoyance. You bitch. At the very least, it seemed her sudden attack was enough to finally trigger the rest of the goons around her, given that one of them now had the brilliant idea of charging towards her. She didn't even bother turning around, so she only turned her head slightly so she could attack from behind her shoulder. Whatever excitement she had previously had already died out after she judged everyone here as a weakling. Perhaps, if they all ganged up against her at the same time, it would at least make it a bit entertaining. Then again. Yosh. It seemed certain Brad had decided to crash on her party without an invite as he landed right on top of the villain that had been running towards her. She turned her head around, not even bothering to look back anymore. A second later, she felt said Brad pressing on his back against hers, with the bored look she had now turning into a small smile. Shouldn't you be in school or something? She whispered, low enough so only he would listen. A chuckle was the response she got, just as she felt his back growing warmer. She didn't have to turn to know he had activated his quirk. Class don't start until next week. His tone was as laid back as ever, almost as if they weren't still surrounded by villains. And I couldn't have you hogging all the fun, sensei. She snorted at that, as if handling a bunch of idiots like this could even be considered fun by her standards. Then again, now that her favorite and only protege was here. Wanna make it interesting then? She said as her grin grew wider. Whoever finished first pays for dinner. Oh, you're on. There was nothing but confidence dripping from his voice, which only made her want to wipe out the grin she knew he was sporting even more. Then, without missing a beat, they both jumped at their respective targets, the sounds of battle filling the street right after. Not even once she turned to look behind her though, knowing that her back was as safe as it could get. After all, if there was someone she could trust, it was Uzumaki Naruto. The first thing he did was to take on Uzumaki's appearance. His hair had grown longer, now almost reaching his shoulders, although it was still as spiky as he remembered it. His attire, of course, had changed to one he was not familiar with. Long gone was the bright orange and white that used to be Uzumaki's hero suit, instead now replaced with a much duller, burnt orange and black. The long coat he used to wear was now instead a zipped-up vest. The most striking difference though was the headband that Uzumaki had around his forehead. That one was most certainly new, although the design he could discern on it was one he remembered seeing on the back of his former hero suit. He had never figured out what that design meant, and even Uzumaki himself had seemed confused when asked about it all those years ago, even though he had worn it proudly. At the very least, that part of him hadn't changed, it seemed. But when he looked down from the headband, he was once more met with that same pair of blue eyes that looked so alike and yet alien from what he remembered. They looked so detached from it all, to the point he would almost go as far as to say they looked lifeless. The fact that they belonged to Uzumaki, who was still simply grinning at them, was enough to make him cold. It was simply such a wrong sight. In Visigal it was his father's voice the one that broke the silence, his tone deadly calm. Go take out the other guy from here, we will cover you. It was a clear order, one that made sense given the nature of the situation at hand. And yet, he couldn't blame Hagakure from seemingly freezing on the spot. It did not take a genius to figure out she was going through the same emotions as he was. Relief and happiness at seeing Uzumaki once more, yet the situation at hand washed away any hope of a joyful reconciliation. And with those eyes of his he truly couldn't blame Hagakure even a bit. Invisible. This time though, Endeavor's voice came out as a hiss, finally taking out Hagakure out of her stupor, if the way he saw her gloves move was any indication. "Oh, on it." Her answer came just as she dropped her gloves into the floor, and while that meant he couldn't pinpoint where she was now, he could still feel her eyes looking at him Todoroki cumpless. She didn't have to voice out a request for him to understand it. He gave her a nod, of course, his gaze returning to Uzumaki's form right after. The wall of ice he had made should give Hagakure enough cover while they handled Uzumaki. Although right now, he was not sure what that would entail, given that Uzumaki seemed pretty content with just looking at them with a tilt of his head, even as Hagakure moved towards who, he assumed, Uzumaki had been targeting. Perhaps, that meant that things didn't have to come to blows. Wait, Mirko. It seemed the fourth member of their group thought otherwise however, for Mirko suddenly rushed towards Uzumaki, and while he couldn't see her face anymore, her intent was more than obvious, given the kick she had launched straight at Uzumaki's head. The attack never rang true though, for Uzumaki was able to raise his right arm just in time to block it, the dry sound of their limbs clashing, filling the room for just a second. "So gung-ho, you haven't changed at all, have you, sensei?" Right before it was replaced by Uzumaki's tone. One filled with tease he himself had been subjected to whenever they trained together. Now though, the situation was far from friendly. "Shodo. I know." He answered Endeavor's yell immediately as they both moved to circle Uzumaki from the sides. Mirko hadn't wasted her time though, for as they moved, he saw her throw kick after kick at Uzumaki, only for him to dodge with an ease that he had never seen from him. He knew Uzumaki was agile, but the way he was able to simply weave through her kicks was completely different from what he had seen of him. As soon as he gotten into a proper position, he wasted no time in sending another wave of ice towards them, specifically aimed with the objective of trapping Uzumaki. At the very least, it seemed Mirko had realized what was going on, for she swiftly jumped back as soon as his ice got close. Now though, he could see the pretty clear snarl on her face. He was sure that, if looks could kill, Uzumaki would have been buried 10 times by now. Uzumaki didn't seem to care though, since that smile of his was still present on his face. Same way he cared little about his ice, for he simply jumped before it reached him, high enough so he was touching the ceiling. But Endeavor has been ready, as a ball of fire was thrown exactly at where Uzumaki was about to make contact with the ceiling. They all knew his quirk let him stick to any surface, so it had been a calculated move from his father. But once more, it never hit home, for Uzumaki had finally decided to use his quirk. It was still a sight to behold, he had to admit, to see a construct of crimson energy suddenly shoot out from Uzumaki's stretched arm, with the energy suddenly taking the form of a chloride as it caught Endeavor's fireball. "You can't take him on by yourself, Mirko." Even from here, he could hear Endeavor's more than annoyed roar, although given the glare Mirko threw in his direction, he was obviously not the only one furious at the moment. "Just do your best to not get in my way." You know their argument was interrupted however, by Uzumaki's mocking tone of all things. "Arguing like that in front of your opponent, I think you guys need to work on your teamwork a bit. Do you think this is a game, Uzumaki?" Endeavor's attention was now squarely on Uzumaki, who had simply dropped down from the ceiling without seemingly a care in the world. "Do you not realize the gravity of the situation you got yourself into?" "Frankly speaking." Uzumaki's tone morphed into a detached one, almost as if he didn't care about what he was hearing. "I think I'm the only one that does right now. Izumakino, Naruto." He called out just as he saw the same crimson energy slowly covering up Uzumaki's form. The response he got was him simply turning to look at him with a look of utter boredom, one that almost had him recoiling in shock, but instead he stood his ground, his narrowed gaze aimed squarely at the one he still considered his best friend. "Why?" he asked without missing a beat. "Why are you doing this? You wanted to be a hero, so why?" If he was honest, he had expected some sort of reaction after saying that, at least something coming from the usually emotional Uzumaki, something that might even clue him in a way of stopping this whole mess before it became even worse. But what he got was nothing. No expression was apparent on Uzumaki's face, almost as if it had been frozen in time. Even his eyes looked lifeless, far more than before, in a way that it sent an honest shiver down his spine. "It's my duty." Uzumaki's actual answer came out just as numb as his expression, which slowly morphed into the same familiar yet so wrongly looking grin he had before. "What else was I supposed to do?" His words only made his eyes go wide in shock, their gazes meeting for just a moment longer, right before Uzumaki turned around on his spot in a hurried manner, just in time to catch not only Endeavor's fire-covered fist, but also Mirko's leg. 1 second later they were both sent flying back as Uzumaki simply tossed them back. The momentaneous distraction had not been in vain though, for he had not wasted his time, especially since Uzumaki was now with his back turned. Flash freeze heat wave. He activated the full capabilities of his quirk, with ice blossoming from his right side at the same time fire burned from his left. In a tandem, his elements flew directly towards Uzumaki, who barely had time to turn his head around before they reached him in unison. But even as they did, with a loud explosion of vapor and smoke filling the area where Uzumaki was, he could have sworn that, for just a fraction of a second, he saw his smile growing even wider. With his still gaze glued to the curtain of smoke, he made a beeline towards Endeavor and Mirko, who were already back on their feet. But as he did, something suddenly left the cloud of smoke, a whirling sound following on its wake, and it was only the years of training that he had that allowed him to create a pillar of ice in front of him, right before the object made impact with his creation, the metallic weapon now stuck deeply into the ice. Did Uzumaki just throw him a massive ninja star? No, that wasn't right. He threw two. For just a second later, another flying piece of metal flew right past him. Somehow, he hadn't been able to see it and he could barely follow it as it went straight towards Mirko. But credit where credit was due, Mirko wasn't a top 10 hero for nothing, given the immediate way she actually jumped over it, the projectile simply sailing past her, towards the other side of the room. Good to know you guys haven't lost your touch. A chuckle was heard from the curtain of smoke, just as Uzumaki walked out from it, his quirk gone. You always told me to never pull my punches, so please don't take it personally, sensei. I'll make us even soon enough, you brat. If Mirko had been angry before, then now she looked nothing short of furious. Scary Uzumaki's tone was back to his mocking one from before, but considering what he had seen so far, he didn't know if that was good or not. I swear you'll never get a boyfriend with that attitude. He knew Uzumaki had a knack for getting into other people's skin, but to think he would still try that even in a situation like this. It also seemed to be working, given the way Mirko's eye was twitching. Don't. But Endeavor hissed at her before she even moved. We need to attack together, or else he'll just keep toying with us. Don't forget he was strong enough to beat All for One. He knew his father was right, and even though they didn't know the details, it didn't change the fact that Uzumaki had been able to defeat someone that rivaled All Might in strength. And that had been 2 years ago, and judging by what he had seen just now, Uzumaki had learned a couple of new tricks. We'll have the advantage once Deku joins us. His father continued, his whole body igniting in flames as he spoke, his voice a low whisper, so that only they would hear him. The only exits are still behind us. We only need to make sure he doesn't get past us for long enough. It was a sound idea, he had to admit. If push came to shove, he could also just block the exits with his ice. He knew Uzumaki could break it, but any extra second could be of value. Have you finished figuring out your plan? The fact that Uzumaki was seemingly content with just letting them dictate the flow of this fight was starting to worry him too. It was very much unlike Uzumaki, but considering everything so far, maybe he shouldn't have been so surprised. Uzumaki. His father spoke in an even tone. I will give you a chance to surrender yourself. Things will go easier for you if you do. Otherwise, it might be a cell in Tartarus what awaits you. Considering the amount of people that escaped that place and that are still on the run, that isn't as much of a threat as you think it is, Endeavor. A shrug is what he got in return, just as Uzumaki started moving towards them slowly, his empty eyes never leaving them. He activated his fire immediately, just as his father did, while Mirko moved to a low stance, seemingly more than ready to jump at any second. You guys are too on the edge, even though we're on the same side. Even though they were more than ready to act, Uzumaki still kept walking as if there was no problem in the world. He saw his chance when he stopped walking, a few meters away from them. Ice formed from his feet, moving swiftly through the floor as he tried to immobilize the blonde. Surprisingly enough, it actually worked, or at the very least, Uzumaki made no movements to avoid it as the ice trapped him by the legs. "Yes, you got me." And yet he seemed to still not care one bit. Mirko did though, as she suddenly lunged at Uzumaki, her prosthetic limb catching him by the neck, and even under Mirko's heated glare and hold, his smile remained. Why? Why would you do this? It seemed he wasn't the only one that was trying to get answers. After everything that happened, you taught me to follow my instincts. Uzumaki spoke calmly, even in such situation. I'm doing just that, sensei. It seemed those words were too much for Mirko, given the growl that he heard from her, followed right after by her punching Uzumaki straight in the face. But the result of that was… what? It was Endeavor who first voiced out his shock, but he couldn't blame him, for just in front of their eyes, Uzumaki had vanished in a cloud of smoke. No, that wasn't right, it was more as if he had popped into smoke, like some sort of balloon. He gave his father a perplexed look, which was returned almost immediately, only followed by Mirko's rage-filled roar as she cracked the ice with a stomp. Once more, they had lost Uzumaki. Mandalay's voice announcing Midoriya was already on its way did little to soothe the feeling of defeat that coursed through him at that moment. She moved slowly, as silently as she could. Every step was calculated, every movement of her body was as controlled as it could get. Her eyes darted from one spot to the next one, her gaze already more than used to the darkness of the night. Her ears were perked up, as any sound she could catch on could be the difference between sweet victory and bitter defeat. She heard nothing however, although that fact didn't surprise her. Her opponent was good, really good in fact. He was the only one that could best her on her home turf, so she was more than aware that any slight mistake could end in. "Oop, you're it. How's that fair?" She whined out as she rubbed her nose, while Naruto simply stood opposite of her, a victorious grin on his lips. "You can't have the super flashy combat quirk and be this good at stealth and detection. You're going to leave me without a job at this rate. Seriously?" By now she could be pretty much indetectable to any of their classmates and even teachers, even Shoji if she tried hard enough, but somehow Naruto was still this final boss she couldn't defeat. Sure, that meant he was an excellent training partner, but her pride could only take so much. "What can I say? I'm just that awesome. And humble too, right?" she muttered under her breath while keeping her pout. "What was that?" "Nothing." Then, she crossed her arms over her chest while giving her back to him. "I'm not talking to you anymore, so leave now, shoo shoo." Of course, she wasn't really upset at him, but he didn't need to know that. "Come on Toru, you can't get upset. You told me to not hold back." She sure did, but that sort of logic didn't matter right now for what she had planned, so she simply harumphed again without turning around. She didn't have to wait long before she felt Naruto's hands on her shoulders. "Fine, how about I make it up to you?" "Really? How?" Her voice turned into a playful tone right after. "Want to grab a bite? Guess I could pay for." "We're not eating ramen again." Just for her voice to turn into a deadpan as he answered her. "You're taking the fun out of life. I hope you know that." And now he was the one doing the pouting, and while she wouldn't say so in fears of stroking his ego even more, at least he looked cute when he did so. "I'll take you on that offer though." She finally turned from her spot just to grab him by the arm, hugging it tightly to her chest. He didn't say anything, even though most would consider her actions bold. She was naked, after all, and yet not even a small blush from him. She was happy he was this comfortable around her, but her pride, damn it. "Hey, want to help me with pranking Mineta?" He suddenly asked as they both walked out of the building they had been using for training, his smile growing comically sinister as he did. "What did poor Mineta-kun do to deserve it?" she asked in wonder, more than aware that getting pranked by him could be a fate worse than death. "He's been giving Izuki some weird looks lately." She saw his eyes narrow in obvious displeasure. "So, I just want to make sure he's on check, a friendly warning if you will." A pang of hurt went into her chest at hearing that, her expression sobering just a bit. It was at moments like this that she was glad he couldn't see her properly, or else she might have some explaining to do. "It's always Izuki with you, huh?" she whispered low enough so it wouldn't reach his ears. She already knew it as a fact, but being reminded of it, especially on her alone time with him, did little to help her mood. "Fine, I'll help," she then declared in an upbeat tone, not wanting Naruto to figure out what she was feeling at the moment. "But you'll have to keep helping me with my training in return." "Deal." He followed suit with a chuckle, to which she herself giggled in response. She knew it wasn't necessary, of course. After all, it wasn't like Naruto ever needed an excuse to help his friends. That was one of the things she liked about him. "I'm sorry Midoriya." His gaze was low, as he found himself unable to look at her in the eyes. The feeling of shame and defeat at having let Uzumaki escape was still more than present in his head. The fact that they then found an unconscious Hagakure, while the villain that had organized this was nowhere to be seen, did not help things either, especially since Mandalay hadn't reported about anyone except themselves leaving the building. Meaning either the villain had somehow managed to vanish without a trace after knocking out Hagakure somehow, or Uzumaki had managed to get to them somehow. "It's fine, Todoroki-kun." Midoriya's passive response as they both stood in front of the ambulance that was hosting the still passed out Hagakure only made him close his eyes, the feeling of failure weighing heavily on him. "We'll get him next time, I'm sure." They didn't even know if a next time would present itself after this blunder, but he could still only nod. As long as Uzumaki was out there, they weren't going to stop trying, that was something that all had promised. He wasn't the only one affected by Uzumaki escaping, of course. From here he could see his father directing everyone to clean up the place, from having to move out the unconscious villains they found down there, to handle the Nomu that Midoriya had knocked out, alongside the one Uzumaki had killed. And Mirko had just left, apparently with the excuse of wanting to look around in case Uzumaki was somehow close. Of course, he doubted that, but outside of Endeavor telling her that there were reports that needed to be made, no one else had said anything to stop her from leaving. How he was only taken out of his thoughts by Midoriya's soft voice, her tone a mix of trepidation and hope. How was he? That was a difficult thing to answer, wasn't it? He knew lying to her would be of no use, but even so, given what he saw, it wasn't exactly easy to explain. He was different. But he owed Midoriya that much at the very least. Sama thinks something must have happened to him, Midoriya. I don't know what, but it was his eye state didn't belong to the Uzumaki we knew. He saw her grow stiff as soon as he finished, and he couldn't blame her for that. Even as unlikely as it had been, she had probably hoped that Uzumaki was still, well, Uzumaki, and that this was all some sort of misunderstanding. But today he had seen a side of Uzumaki that he didn't even know existed. I see Midoriya's voice was barely above a whisper, her hair shadowing her eyes. Then, without missing a beat, she started walking away from him, earning his concerned stare. Midoriya. I think I'll look around a bit more. Maybe Mirko had a point, of course, he didn't have it in her to tell her that it was futile, so he could only offer her another nod before she zipped out of the place using her quirk, with a sigh leaving his lips right after. Today they had lost. But something told him it was only the beginning. How do you do it? She asked in an amazed tone, just as Naruto finished waving at the group of kids that had stopped them just a few minutes ago. It was something that started happening ever since the sports festival ended, and to say she wasn't used to it would be an understatement. Surely, she wasn't the weird one, right? Anyone would freak out if adults and kids alike started gawking at you and asking for your autograph, right? And yet, Naruto had no issue interacting with them in such situation. Heck, he even looked like he was enjoying the attention by a lot, rather than finding it embarrassing like she did. I mean, isn't it cool? Naruto's answer came with an excited twinkle of his eyes. People are already starting to recognize us, and we haven't even finished our first year yet. She understood the appeal, of course, but still. Besides, shouldn't you be trying to get used to this? He then asked, his smile turning into a teasing one she recognized quite well. Or is our next symbol of peace going to have a stutter attack every time a kid asks her to sign their newest Deku action figure? She had not thought of that. As in, she had been so busy focusing on mastering her quirk alongside everything related to UA that she had completely forgotten about that little detail. She wanted to be the next symbol of peace, of course. To be the greatest hero out there. And with that also came being a public figure, pretty much a celebrity with everything that it entailed. Suddenly she swallowed, her mind only now coming to terms to the many things she would have to do if she reached the top. Like having to sign kids' action figures. Suddenly, the future didn't look so bright. Alright, it's way too early for a panic attack. Before she knew it, Naruto had put his arm around her. Alright, I've decided, we're starting your training today. Am I what? Wait, what was he talking about? In response, he just grinned, a glint in his eyes that was making her feel even more nervous than before, right before he guided her inside the bus they had been waiting for. Hey, everyone. He then spoke, high enough so that most people would hear him, which almost made her choke on air alone. This girl got second place on UA's sports festival last week. How cool is that? No, this could not be happening. Why? She squeaked out at him, just as the passenger's face started to light up in recognition. She knew what was coming now, and it almost made her whimper as a result. Trial by fire, Izuki. Where's your plus ultra? This is now the plus ultra she wanted. A tired breath left him, right as he closed the door behind him, frustration bubbling inside of him as a glare set itself in his eyes. All of this mess, just for nothing. The information he had gotten from that fool had been barely worth the trouble, especially since it involved facing off against heroes this time. That by itself was enough to give him a headache. Of course, he had been prepared for it. He knew exactly what, or rather who, would be opposing him when he had decided to walk this path, and he had prepared himself for that, he truly had. At the very least, he hadn't let his emotions run his judgment today, so that was good, especially considering his condition, so to speak. The headache was an awful reminder of that tidbit. And all of it for what? To learn that Kurogiri was out there, seemingly giving nomas to random idiots. Tied to Shigaraki his ass, this guy knew shit about Shigaraki. That did raise the question of why Kurogiri, who was most definitely doing it on Shigaraki's orders, was giving out free nomu to any villain with wishes of grandeur. Years ago, perhaps he would have understood, but right now he would have thought that nomas were a commodity that shouldn't be just tossed out on a whim. So either Shigaraki was doing stupid shit again, or they had more nomas than what everyone believed. Another sigh left his lips, a part of him wanting to go back to see if he could get any more information. Interrogation had never been his forte, sure, but he was sure he had gotten as much as he could have from that guy. It was easy when dealing with people that had no training in handling torture. At the very least though, he did gain something from his last mission. He took out his phone from his pocket, the screen shining on his face as his lips slowly turned upwards into a smile at what he saw. The identity of the new vigilante that started operations a few weeks ago has now been confirmed by the HPSC itself after a direct altercation with a group of heroes, among them being our current number 1 hero, Endeavor. Uzumaki Naruto, age 21 and former student of UA High School, became a public figure during his tenure at UA, however he disappeared 2 years ago, at the end of the war, after evidence of his relationship with none other than All For One became public. The fact that Uzumaki Naruto was responsible of All For One's death, however, has brought into question the nature of their former relationship, especially now that he seems to be only targeting villains. Reports like those filled his eyes, as many news sites seemed to be rushing to bite out off whatever the HPSC had decided to reveal. He wasn't surprised by this though. In fact, he had expected it as much. It was one of the reasons he even bothered facing against Endeavor's little team rather than taking the sneaky way out. It seemed he was now back into public consciousness. There was only one issue though, which had his smile slowly turn into a frown. They were using his old picture from UA. It shouldn't have surprised him, of course, given that it was probably the most recent one that they could find of him. But even so, seeing that picture, even though it was his face right there, it felt alien to him. Yes. Fortunately, he didn't have to keep looking at it, given that he was forced to answer a call, and given who was calling him, it could only mean one thing. He's moving. Kina's words were simple, yet effective, as his frown slowly turned into a grin once more. Things were moving along just fine. Chapter 4. Hunt. Surprise. When she woke up earlier on the day, she hadn't expected much. She hadn't really told any of her classmates what today meant for her, after all. The only one that knew, as far as she had been aware, had been Kyoka. And considering she hadn't seen her for most of the early morning, she had even started wondering if she remembered it. But even so, she had to admit, being asked out by the boy she had feelings for had definitely been a welcome surprise, even if it had been just a friendly outing. To say she hadn't expected the sight, however, as they had finally returned to the dorms, would be putting it lightly. Maybe she should have seen it coming, given how insistent Naruto had been about taking their time before returning to the dorms. But even if she had seen it coming, even if she hadn't been caught off guard, seeing most of her classmates gathered like this, the first floor of their dorm being decorated like this because of her birthday, she doubted her reaction would have been any different. And she had no shame in admitting that it took a lot of composure to not let the tears flow out of her eyes, even as she held her hands over her mouth to hold the gasp that had left her lips. Growing up as she did, she never really had that many friends, if any, to celebrate her birthday with, let alone what seemed to be a surprise party. So yes, she was most definitely surprised. I hope those are happy tears there, Momo. And to her side, it was Naruto who spoke with a grin, his blue eyes sparkling with barely concealed amusement. Because if not, then this was all Kyoka's idea, I swear. As if you could have thought anything better. She saw Kyoka huff out in indigestion right before she sent a smile in her direction. I hope the jackass didn't bore you to death much, we couldn't think of a better way to keep you busy. Hey. And with Naruto's yell, she was not able to hold back the laughter that bubbled up inside of her. That day became her most memorable birthday. Do you think he hates us? That simple question was enough to make her feel as if someone had punched her straight in the gut, to the point she almost ended up dropping the tray with the cups of tea she was holding. It didn't take a genius to know who Toru was referring to, especially given what had transpired as of late. That was the reason she was even here in the first place, in Toru's apartment. Most of their friends had agreed that, even though she had no actual wounds, that Toru needed to take a few days off to recover from the failed raid. Of course, she had volunteered to look out for Toru in the meantime. She might no longer be the vice president of their class, but old habits were hard to get rid of, and looking out for her friends' well-being was just something she had grown used to by now. But even so, she hadn't expected such question from her. Given she couldn't see her expression, it had been hard to know how Toru was feeling after everything that had happened. But now, she supposed her suspicions were being proven correct. After all, she doubted anyone would be feeling well after being knocked out cold by someone they considered a close friend, and in Toru's case, she knew Naruto had been one of the closest friends she had in UA. Before everything fell apart, of course. Throwing a look at the TV in front of the sofa Toru was sitting on, she found quickly enough what had probably brought up Toru's question in the first place, with her eyes showing nothing but defeat as a picture of Naruto appeared on the screen. That was something the news outlet had been doing the moment the HPSC confirmed his identity as the newly active vigilante that had been prowling the streets as of late, with their words going from insults that made her blood boil to praises that made her feel sick. Either he was a villain that was trying to take the criminal world for himself, now that All for One wasn't here, or he was the only one willing to do the job that the heroes were unable to do, or at the very least that was how the different news outlet liked to portray him. Maybe it was to be expected, given how fragile everything still was after the war. She shook her head at that thought, for now wasn't the time for such thoughts. Instead, her focus went back to Toru, who she could tell had her eyes glued to the screen, almost as if she was trying to burn Naruto's old image in her brain. Putting the tray to the side, she slowly sat beside her, her mind trying to come up with the right words to say. On one hand, she wanted to deny her question out of sheer principle, after all the idea of Naruto honestly hating them was more than enough to make her chest tighten in pain. I don't know. But that would have been an empty answer, one that was more hopeful than realistic, one that might give them both a momentaneous sense of relief, but that would do little to help in the long run. We'll have to ask him once we find him again. She continued then, the bare hints of a smile forming on her lips as she saw Toru nod in response without hesitation. And if he does, bet we can bribe him with a bit of ramen. The light giggle that escaped Toru was more than worth a lame joke. You could have asked for something else, you know. He said as a chuckle left him. I told you to ask for anything within reason, and yet you ask for something we already do. But it's been a while since came here together, old man. And after slurping what was most definitely by now not a healthy number of noodles, Naruto answered back with a grin. Besides, there's nothing better than this anyway, so as long as you're paying for it, I'm good. Then he saw Naruto simply return his attention to the bowl in front of with enough gusto that he worried for a second he would choke on them, but as another small laugh left him, he signaled to the chef to keep the food coming. The young man to his side had just officially finished his first year at UA, after all, so he supposed he could let him indulge that much today, even if he still didn't understand how he could work on such a diet. Then again, Naruto wasn't the only one of his students present here that had done just that. I still think Katsuden is better, and to Naruto's left, he heard the soft voice of young Midoriya mutter in protest. Of course, nothing but amusement danced in his eyes as he saw Naruto suddenly stop eating, just to then give young Midoriya the most offended look he had ever seen on his face. You take that back. Stop that. I will after you take those words back. Then seeing him pull on her cheeks was enough to have him grinning in nothing but amusement at such a sight. For so long he had been worried about the future, especially now that One for All wasn't within him anymore, but seeing the young man he had pretty much adopted and the young woman that had inherited his powers like this, it brought calmness to his heart. Something told him things would be alright. I didn't expect to see you so soon, All Might. He truly didn't, for the last thing he had expected today was for his former rival to have been waiting for him by the entrance of his home. Sorry to intrude like this. All Might's tone was apologetic, even as the two of them simply stood shoulder to shoulder outside of his home. Are you sure you don't want to come in? He asked once more with a frown. Ray wouldn't mind, really. It's fine. But the answer he got was a headshake. This won't take long anyway. It's about Uzumaki then, I assume. He spoke in a tired tone, knowing that if All Might was here, it had to be about his confrontation with Uzumaki. The nod he got only served as confirmation. The HPSC All Might started, his tone a mix of worry and trepidation. What are they going to do about all of this? I assume they aren't just going to remain idle, and they're obviously not trying to hide it. They already told me and other heroes of the top 10 that finding Uzumaki had to be our top priority. He confirmed in annoyance. He had just come from that meeting, after all, and being told what to do by the HPSC still left a sour taste in his mouth, even if the new administration was far less problematic than the previous one. Some of them think that Uzumaki has just gone rogue and that his actions are just helping undermine how the public sees heroes nowadays. And the others? He could sense All Might's growing anger as he asked that, for which he couldn't blame him. He would probably have the same reaction if he knew they were badmouthing someone like Shoto behind his back. You saw the news. He bit his lips in frustration, remembering what he had been told. They are still those that think he was working with All for One. He was stopped abruptly by the sound of All Might slamming his cane on the ground with a surprising amount of force. He could see his body shake in what was obviously anger, especially given the look he saw in his sunken eyes. Sorry, All Might started just as deep breaths left him. I understand. He did, as even he couldn't ignore the feeling of shame that grew inside of him. In that case then. He received a raised eyebrow from him in return, to which he could only nod. If I find anything, you'll be the first to know. He promised just as he closed his eyes. I know, my whole family still owes Uzumaki a lot. I don't know why he's doing this, All Might, but I do want to help him before things get even worse. To his words, he got a pointed look from him, and he could just tell that his words were being judged right there on the spot. He said nothing, however, not blaming him even a bit for such level of wariness when it came to matters regarding Uzumaki. Thank you, Endeavor. But in the end, it seemed that All Might had deemed him trustable enough, given the honesty and gratitude that was dripping through his tired voice. And to that, he could only nod wordlessly. How did he? But then, just a second later, he spoke once more, his voice barely above a whisper. How did my boy look, Endeavor? It was now that he could see that it as clearly as possible, that in this moment it wasn't All Might, the former symbol of peace, that had asked that question, but rather just a man worried sick and in desperate needs of any answer he could find. And as much as he wanted to give him a comforting answer, the only thing he could offer was a shake of his head. His eyes were different. He said, remembering the words his own son had used to describe the encounter. I don't know what happened, All Might, but it was as if we were dealing with a completely different person. Nothing but silence followed what he said, and with the way All Might hung his head, it was hard to see what kind of expression he had. Thank you, Endeavor. He said so once more, right before he turned away from him. I won't take more of your time then. What are you going to do now? He asked as he saw him moving towards his car. You said the HPSC talked with other top 10 heroes, right? Guess I'll be knocking a few more doors then, hoping that this old sack of bones still has some pulls with today's youth. Such was the answer he got, with All Might not stopping his walk as he spoke. I already failed that boy, but if I can help in any way like this, then he refused to fail him again. They were fucked. That was the only way to describe it, plain and simple. How had they been founded, he didn't know, for as far as he knew, All for One had made sure no one could trace them back here. This was supposed to be a pretty secure place, all things considered, with the heroes not even having an idea that it existed. And yet, here they were, all of them beaten by a single blonde bastard in the form of Uzumaki Naruto. Then again, maybe beaten wasn't the right term. That would imply they had actually put up a fight, but Uzumaki hadn't even given them enough time for even that, and instead had just appeared from what had seemed out of nowhere right before attacking with a speed that he didn't even know Uzumaki had. The result? He was now hanging upside down, with the only thing that was keeping him up being the weird tentacle-like crimson thing that was part of Uzumaki's quirk, and that right now was wrapped around his torso with such strength that he was sure he felt a few bones popping already. For better or worse though, he wasn't the only one in such position, as both Toga and Compress were on the exact same predicament as he was. I will only ask this once. Uzumaki's voice came out as nothing short of a growl, and with his eyes now red and his rather ragged look, he would begrudgingly admit that it was an imposing sight. Tell me where Shigaraki and All for One are, now. And as if to make sure they understood the situation, he could feel the tendril currently holding become even tighter around him. He even hissed as he felt as if the thing was burning his scales. As if we would talk, it was Compress who shot back first, only followed by a cry of pain as the thing holding Compress suddenly slammed him against the floor. Of course, he started struggling even more as soon as that happened, but the only thing that got was Uzumaki throwing him a glare and bared teeth. It was almost as if they were dealing with a wild animal right now, especially considering how more visible those marks in his cheeks were looking now. An animal that looked more than ready to rip them apart limb by limb. And while he knew that a part of it was Uzumaki's quirk, right now the oppressing feeling coming down on him would have been enough to have him struggling for breath, even without his quirk squeezing him to such degree. He hated to admit it, but he was kind of jealous of Toga, who was simply unconscious. I'll give ya one chance, Spinner. Uzumaki declared, those red eyes of making a hole through his own gaze. Be the smart one here and talk. Did Uzumaki really think he was going to betray Tamura like that? After everything they had done and accomplished, and now that they were so close to their goal, did Uzumaki think so little of their loyalty to this cause? His only response was to spat on the ground, which, even though he didn't think was possible, made Uzumaki look even more pissed off than before. Now he looked ready to kill. Now, Naruto, empty threats are not the way to get others to listen to you. And then, barely a few seconds later, they were all tossed aside quite literally by Uzumaki, their bodies slamming into the wall on the opposite side of the room. Which only happened because of All for One's sudden appearance, as the man that had started it all simply walked through a black portal. Of course, as soon as his body landed on the floor, he did his best to stand up as fast as he could, more than ready to help in taking down Uzumaki, and he could see Compress preparing to do the same. Well, wait. But that idea was thrown out of the window when more portals started appearing, right below their feet. He knew this was Kurogiri's quirk, of course, which meant they were all being pretty much kicked out of this place. The last thing he saw was Uzumaki, still on all fours, lunging at All for One. Moving stealthy through every alley he could find was far easier said than done. His quirk made him quite distinctive, after all, and even if these were the slums where heroes were hardly liked, he still knew he couldn't risk it. It would only take one idiot trying to play snitch for everything to come crumbling down. And with how on edge everyone seemed to be as of late, the risk was even greater. So whenever he moved, it was slowly and carefully, with a brown cloak covering up his body. He had been forced to ditch his sword back in his apartment to avoid standing out even more, which just made him feel even more vulnerable. Especially with Uzumaki Naruto seemingly doing stuff off the law now. Because that was exactly what he needed in his life now, having to fear being found by the bastard that has ruined everything they had tried to accomplish. But perhaps not everything was lost, or at the very least he certainly hoped it so. Hell, that was the only reason he had even gone out in the first place. That was also the only reason he had called one of his former allies. There was no way he could simply just sit still if Uzumaki was out there doing shit like that. So when he finally reached the abandoned warehouse he had been aiming for, with the moon high in the sky, it was a sigh of relief that left him as soon as his eyes landed on the one waiting for him. "Impress," he called as he rushed towards him, simply making him tip his hat in return. "You have had better days, my friend." Their hands met in a handshake as he got closer, and it honestly took a lot of willpower to not just hug the hell out of Compress right now. It had been almost a year since the last time they saw one another, after all. "Well, what did you expect? We all can't have an easy time hiding in plain sight," he said with a bit of heat, knowing that his appearance only made him having to become a recluse. "I apologize." His anger washed away by Compress's honest words. It wasn't his fault anyway, and he had plenty of others to blame for it. "Are you sure you weren't followed? Unless Uzumaki can turn into trash cans, no," he said, remembering how careful he had been on his way here. His words made Compress tense, which he couldn't fault him for given who he had brought up. "We need to contact Tamura." "That wouldn't be easy." "I know, but what else are we supposed to do? Wait until we're picked off one by that guy?" he snarled, his body shaking in anger. Dabi was in Tartarus, Toga was still missing after all these years, and Tamura had just been radio silence for a while now. Was this truly what the League of Villains had ended up as? He refused to go down without a fight, crazy Uzumaki or not. They needed to help Tamura with whatever he was planning. "You know how to contact them, don't you?" he said, already knowing the answer even as Compress remained silent. "Dude, if this isn't an emergency then I don't know what it is." He shut his mouth immediately before finishing as a sudden sound ringed around him, that of metal suddenly meeting the floor in their feet. "You said you weren't followed." And without missing a beat they were both back to back, his eyes trying to find whatever had made that noise, and he could only assume Compress was also trying to accomplish the same. "I wasn't." He knew Uzumaki could be stealthy, but even that had to have a limit, right? They had been caught by surprise by him before already, but he had made sure this time. It couldn't be Uzumaki, right? The answer he got came in the form of a shadow falling right above them, and it was only out of sheer reflexes that he was able to jump out of the way. Shit. Not that it ended up mattering much though, for the next thing he knew he was slammed to a wall by a crimson claw, the thing holding him also burning him to the point he couldn't hold the hiss of pain that left him. It didn't take him long to send a glare to the one responsible, with that bastard sitting on the back of Compress's body, and even from here he could see the dagger that was being pressed at his neck. "It has been a while, you two." Uzumaki's tone was a leisure one, almost as if he hadn't just trapped them both. "I don't have the time to reminiscence today though, so I'll only ask this once, and this time I am expecting an answer." And even though right now, Uzumaki looked far more composed than the last time he had seen him, for some reason, he felt as if he was staring at a much more dangerous animal than before. "Where is Shigaraki Tamura?" Chapter 5. Trace. What the fuck is that thing? Now usually, he would have cared little about anything that came out of Bakugo's mouth. The guy had a stick shoved up so far in his ass that it was a surprise he could even speak, after all, and that was ignoring the way he treated Izuki. But right now, he actually found himself sharing the sentiment. It was hard not to anyway, considering how much they had thrown at the thing standing in front of them. Todoroki's ice had barely slowed it down. Bakugo's explosions had done seemingly nothing. It had even tanked one of Izuku's punches as if it had just tickled it. And now it was just standing up once more after he had tried to crush it by extending his quirk into a claw, seemingly unaffected by it. "Stop playing with your food, Nomu. I want to see at least a couple of them dead before All Might gets here." And there was that annoying white-haired bastard that had apparently orchestrated this entire attack, with his teeth gritting in frustration at just the thought of what the bastard had done. Because of him, Aizawa-sensei was badly hurt. Because of him, all his classmates and friends were put in danger. Because of him, Sayu had almost died. And all because he wanted to kill old man Yagi. As if he would let that happen in the first place. So, when he lowered his body, his hands now pressing on the ground, his quirk was already covering his whole body. He could feel it, and he let it happen, as more and more power surged through his body. He knew his emotions affected his quirk more than others, and that his anger was fueling it pretty spectacularly right now. The end result? A tail. Maybe it wasn't the best way to describe it, but it was the term that just came natural to him, as the red energy that was quirk slowly took the form of a tail coming out of his lower back. He could also feel Bakugo's and Todoroki's gaze on him now, which wasn't surprising, given that this was the first time he had used his quirk like this in front of his classmates. Except Izuku of course, whose eyes matches with his for just a second before they both nodded, right as he saw green lightning dancing around her form. Good, because if this thing had really been sent to face off against the old man then. I really couldn't afford to hold back. You do know I only need one of you, right? He commented lightly, one hand pressing a kunai to compress his neck while the other one was extended toward Spinner, holding him on place thanks to the Kyuubi's chakra. So, you two aren't doing yourselves any favors by keeping your mouth shuts. But the only answer he got being a scoff and a growl, he could do nothing but to shake his head in return. If there was anything worse than dealing with criminals like this, it was dealing with people like this that also just truly believed in whatever they were doing. That conviction was harder to beat out. You are way too loyal to someone that doesn't give a damn about you lot. He voiced in mock disappointment, his gaze always moving between the two former members of the League of Villains. Shut your trap, Uzumaki. And he wasn't surprised when it was Spinner the one that yelled out first. I'm just saying you guys are showing too much dedication to a kid that has already discarded you. He shrugged, a small smirk forming on his lips as he saw Spinner's face twisting in anger, just as he felt compress trembling below him. I don't see him coming to rescue you anytime soon. What happened right after, he decided, was his fault for tempting fate that much. He turned his gaze up, just in time to see a black void forming right above, one that he recognized quite well. Next thing he knew, he was forced to jump back just to avoid being crushed by the Nomu that had just slipped out of said black portal. His eyes remained focused on the Nomu, even as Spinner sprinted towards Compress, who was slowly standing up from behind the growling Nomu. The second portal appearing right in front of them made it pretty obvious what the owner of those portals, Kurogiri of course, was trying to accomplish. So when the Nomu rushed towards him, with this one sporting one massive eye on its face, his eyes were still focused on the back of Compress and Spinner. Sidestepping the charging Nomu was easy enough and dashing towards the portal let him close the distance in mere seconds. Compress was gone already, but that mattered little. Spinner spluttered out, for even though he was already halfway through the portal, he now had a hold of that red scarf of this. And he refused to let go, even as their eyes met, with Spinner glaring while he just gave him a half-lidded stare in return. He only released him when he was forced to dodge a laser of all things, for apparently that massive eye on the Nomu's face wasn't just for show. By the time he had recovered, the portal had already disappeared. When he stood there, his eyes locked onto the place that the portal had been, he wasn't able to hide his feelings from appearing in his face. He grinned. He then leaned backward slightly in order to dodge another laser. Now what to do with you? He whispered, knowing he couldn't just leave a raging Nomu just like that. The answer came in the form of his favorite spiraling ball of chakra as it formed in the palm of his hand. Relax, it's not my blood. I wasn't worried. It seemed she really wasn't, given that the only thing his current appearance got from her was a raised eyebrow. You still smell like shit though. He really did. I might have gone a bit overblown, yes. Maybe drilling a Rasengan right into the Nomu's head had not been the cleanest way to do things, all things considered, but it had been effective nonetheless. But still, I got what we wanted. Is it working? His eyes then turned sharp just as he focused on the laptop in Kaina's lap. The tracker seems to be working just fine. She answered as she went back to look at the screen, with a pretty familiar map of the country currently being displayed on it. They already stopped moving. And on said map, a red dot was currently blinking non-stop. I told you the tech was trustable. He muttered as he walked close, recognizing the general area they would be going next. It wasn't close however, which he supposed wasn't a surprise. All for One definitely had more than one hidden base all around the country and it seemed Tamura was now using them. Fortunately, the tracker he had hidden into Compress's clothes was now a beacon to them. You still haven't even told me where you got it in the first place. Kaina complained, to which he could only shrug as a smile formed on his lips in an attempt to hide the displeasure he felt at such question. It's better if you don't know. That was the best answer he could give, not because he didn't trust Kaina, but because he had already done enough damage to the person that had made this for him. The least he could do by now was keeping her identity a secret even from his allies. We're going to Osaka now. It seemed his confrontation with the last vestiges of the League of Villain was coming closer and closer. What the fuck do you want, Whiskers? He growled out, not being in the mood for dealing with anyone's shit right now, especially Uzumaki of all people. Because if you came to gloat then I swear. Relax, would you? But to that, he only got an eye roll from the most annoying guy in his class. I didn't come here to pick a fight, Bakugo. I just wanted to talk for a bit. Well, I don't want to fucking hear it. He had decided to take a walk at night so that he could be alone with his thoughts for a while, so the last thing he needed was Uzumaki now following him around. So, get lost or. I want to help. His mouth clicked shut after hearing that, his glare turning into surprise right before he went back to glare at him once more, which Uzumaki returned with a glare of his own. I don't need your help. It didn't take a genius to know what he was talking about. They had just come from the stupid provisional license exam, after all, and he was one of the 2 people that had somehow failed the damn thing. That thought was enough to make him grit his teeth in sheer anger, with small explosions popping off in his fingers with every second. Yeah, sure you don't. Uzumaki's huff was really doing little with his mood. You have to do another test, go get the license, right? I thought we could train together for that, like sparring. Was he being for real right now? He would have laughed straight to his face if he wasn't so busy scowling. Why would I even want to spar with you? He asked mockingly, truly not understanding him. He didn't like Uzumaki, after all, although that was the understatement of the century. And Uzumaki hated him too, that much was obvious, which didn't surprise him, given how he seemed to be attached to Deku's hip. Because you have nobody else besides Ejiro willing to train with you? Uzumaki answered with a smirk, only making his right eye twitch. And Ejiro is cool and all, but there's only so much you can practice when going against the same guy, and his quirk isn't exactly the most versatile out there. He didn't know what he hated the most, if Uzumaki's know-it-all tone, or the fact that he was onto something here. I don't want your pity. But that didn't mean he was just going to accept his damn charity case. If he thought he was like everyone else in their class that thought he was hot shit just because he had nothing better to do than making friends, then he was sorely mistaken. It's not pity. Uzumaki actually snapped at him, the bastard. I want to get stronger too, and this way we both win. Don't you have that shitty Deku for that? He asked, right as a smirk formed on his lips. Or did you finally realize she's just dragging you down? Don't push it, Bakugo. His voice actually put him on edge, especially since it was accompanied by his eyes turning red for just a second before he took a deep breath with his eyes closed, them going back to blue once more. You like to fight, don't you? Huh? What kind of question is that? Of course he liked it, wasn't that obvious enough? That's why I want to train with you. Nobody else in our class truly likes to fight like you do, so I don't have to worry about holding back or anything. He could only scoff at that, actually agreeing with Uzumaki for once. Not that he was still convinced or anything, even if had to begrudgingly admit Uzumaki was one of the strongest ones in their class. He would never admit he was the strongest one though, for that title was only for himself. Think about it this way. And now he was back to that insufferable grin of his. This way you can hit me, and I can hit you without remorse. I think that's a fair enough deal. Well, when he put it like that. This doesn't make us friends. He declared in a low tone. Noted. His deadpan tone almost made regret his decision, but he did want to grow stronger no matter what right now. So then, with a final nod, a deal was done between him and the most insufferable blonde he knew. What did you just say? Of course, that yell coming from Kitsuki just had to be followed by him grabbing the other guy by the neck of his hero suit. Wanna say that to my face, dipshit? Hey that's enough, Bakupro. He tried his best to stop him from quite literally blowing off the guy who looked about to pass out already. He's not worth it. You're not going to help by killing this guy, Bakugo. And to the other side, it was Mina who also made a grab for Kitsuki's arm. Sure, he deserves it, but still. You're not helping, Mina. He grunted out, for even though he got what she, and obviously Bakugo, were feeling, it didn't mean he could just let them beat the living crap out of someone. Even though a part of him wanted to do the same. In the end, it seemed their words rang true as Kitsuki simply shoved the other hero, whose name he didn't even know, into the ground before turning around and walking away fuming, with everyone around them giving him a wide berth as he did. Of course, he and Mina were quick to follow, although they both throwed the shivering guy a final nasty glare before leaving. It might have seemed like too much, but considering what the guy had said, he honestly thought he hadn't gotten enough. He just didn't want to see his other best friend in problems for picking fights. Even if the thought of people talking crap about Naruto was enough to anger him too beyond belief. And it was obvious Mina felt the same. As for Kitsuki. Next time I hear crap like that about Whiskers, I'm killing them, so don't even try to stop me. Look, dude, I know how you feel. He really did, so he leveled a stare at Kitsuki's glare. But this might get us a hint as to where Naruto is, and we can't get kicked out because you started fighting with everyone. Sure, Kitsuki had gotten a lot better with handling his anger, but whenever it came to Naruto lately, it was as if he just went back to their UA days. Yeah. Thankfully, it seemed Mina too understood the situation. You can punch them after we're done. Or maybe not, given the smirk that the two were now sporting. It was hard being the voice of reason right now, especially with how vindictive these two could be when it came to defending Naruto. We aren't getting shit anyway. Katsuki grunted after calming down a bit, with their gazes moving to the police tape that was separating the scene of the crime. If it was that easy to find him, we wouldn't be wasting our time here. Are we even sure Naruto did this? Mina asked next just as she hugged her arm. There aren't that many fighting nomas of all things. There was no way Naruto wasn't involved in this, especially with how gruesome the scene looked. He didn't like linking Naruto to stuff like that, but, given recent events, it was hard not to. Did Pinacone hair find anything useful? Katsuki's attention was now on Mina. She was trying to find anything about the weird ninja star Naru used, but to this, she bit her lip. I don't think she has yet. Damn, if Yaoi Rozu wants able to get anything with all the resources she had. Maybe we should ask Ed Shot. Ninja stuff is kind of his thing, right? His words only earned a scoff from Katsuki, for which he couldn't blame him. After all, the whole idea of Naruto using ninja stuff just sounded too silly, didn't it? Sure, the guy was a natural for stealth stuff, which had been quite weird during their time at UA, but still, was he really going around carrying stuff like shurikens now? If the situation wasn't so dire, he would have laughed at the mere idea. A silence fell on them as they didn't know what else to say. It was as Katsuki had said, he doubted they would get anything useful from here, which just made things even more frustrating. They really needed to find a lead, ASAP. And almost as if someone had heard his plea, his phone suddenly buzzed. This wasn't the only one though, as it seemed both Mina and Katsuki had gotten a message too. All of them at the same time? Had something happened? Or maybe it was just the group chat they had with the rest of their former class. The answer was neither though, for even though the name of the owner of the message was one he recognized immediately, it was also one he didn't expect to hear from, especially nowadays. Headmaster Nezu. Chapter 6. Meeting. I see you're finally up, Naruto. The first thing he saw when his eyes opened was the disgusting sight of All For One, grinning down at him in a way that had his blood boiling. He was immediately on edge, his body jumping into action from the chair he had been sitting on. He saw there was some sort of glass wall between him and All For One, but he doubted it would do anything to stop his quirk. I wouldn't do that if I were you. His comment was akin to someone talking down to a child, which only made him growl. He jumped, his fist reeled back, for not only was he going to break the glass, but he was also going to break the bastard's face in. Ah. Or he would have, if a sudden shock hadn't been sent through his entire body, his form spamming on the floor as he felt as if he was getting hit by Denki's quirk, only 10 times worse. I did warn you, didn't I? The pain only stopped after a few seconds, followed by those words. If you try anything, that little thing on your neck will have you down in a second. It could even kill you if I amp it up enough, just so you know. As he gasped for breath, his hands went immediately to his neck, to where he could feel something metallic. Some sort of collar if he had to take a guess, one that was seemingly the source of the shock. Suffice to say, he tried to break it almost immediately. Silly boy. What followed was another handful of seconds of nothing but pain. As long as you're staying here, the rules are simple enough. The only thing he could do was to glare up at the bastard. You try to get violent, to escape, or to break my new toy, and, well, you already saw what happened, didn't you? Fuck off. Deciding to do his best Bakugo impression, he simply cursed out as he spat into the ground, but his actions only got a chuckle out of him. Now, there's no need to get all angsty. I just want to have a talk, Naruto. The friendly tone coming from his mouth only made him feel even more sick. You have no idea how hard it was to find an opportunity to get you back, and I would rather not waste what little time we have. You sent your goons to our camp just to get to me. He spoke through gritted teeth, with both anger and shame growing inside of him at that thought. Anger at the fact he let himself be caught by the League of Villains. And shame by the fact all his friends from both classes had been put into danger because of him. You should have just sent me the address and I would have come directly to kick your ass. How scary. Another chuckle left him, which did not help with his mood in the slightest. Perhaps as you were before, but right now. There's a difference between confidence and foolishness, young man. He only growled in response, wishing more than anything to wipe that smirk off his face. His comment though, did make him pause for just a moment, as much as he hated to admit it. As he was before. Intrigued, are you? And sadly, for him, All For One caught on that fact pretty much immediately. Let's do a little test then, since I'm curious myself. Next thing he knew, All For One had suddenly thrown something to the floor in front of him, almost hitting the transparent cube that was his current prison. It was a mask. A weird white mask with a bit of paint on it that made it look like a fox. I would be carrying one of those too if I looked like you. Seriously, what was he trying to do? Nothing then, but his words seemed to have little effect on him as he suddenly threw something else, the object making a metallic clank as it landed right beside the mask. Now it was a knife. Dagger. Something like that, although a weird-looking one considering it had 3 pointy ends. This time he said nothing and simply glared to the side. He wasn't going to be entertaining all for one of all people. He'd rather just think of way of getting out of this mess before things got worse somehow. How about this one, then? He wasn't looking, so he couldn't know whatever other thing had been thrown at him. It sounded made out of metal too, and as much as he hated it, his curiosity did end up getting the best of him as his gaze slowly turned to the front once more. And his body froze as soon as it landed on the third item. It was a headband, a black one with some sort of plate on it, with a symbol that he recognized quite well. It was the same symbol he had felt more than a little compelled to add to his hero suit. He hadn't known why at the time, just that he found himself drawing it without realizing it one day. And now, looking at that same symbol on that piece of cloth, for reasons beyond him, it filled him with some sort of familiarity. It was a warmness, almost nostalgic feeling that he didn't even understand properly. Oh? So, I suppose your memories aren't as buried as I thought. Then, in one swift move, All for One grabbed everything he had thrown, hiding it from his sight in barely a moment's notice. Give that back. Without even thinking it, he launched himself at All for One once more, not caring even a little that his chances of actually landing a hit were slim to none. Ah. Of course, another shock was sent right to his body from the collar on his neck, but even as he writhed in pain on the floor, he still dragged himself forward as much as he could, his yells being a combination of pain and sheer frustration. Give it back. He yelled through gritted teeth, his quirk activating even as more and more pain filled his body. Everything was feeling numb at that point, but that didn't stop him from throwing one desperate punch at the transparent wall separating him and All for One. The satisfying crack that appeared on it did help his mood just a bit right before everything finally went dark. You do realize this is probably a trap, right? Kaina's voice ringed on his ear as he walked closer and closer to his target. It was a mansion, a pretty massive one that for some reason All for One had hidden on the mountainside of Osaka, and that now Tamura was apparently using if the tracker was anything to go by. Well, in that case it wouldn't be the first time one of these blow up in my face. He said lightly, a small smile forming on his lips as he heard Kaina snort from the opposite end of their communication headset. I'm not apologizing for that again. And even from here he could feel her huffing in annoyance, which only made him even more amused. I won't be able to assist once you go inside, so just be on your guard, alright? Good to know you actually care. His smiling visage slowly turned into a neutral expression once he reached the door. I have my escape route ready, so just make sure to give me a heads up if you see anything. That's why he had left her up on the mountains from where she could see the area around the mansion, after all. So, after receiving one last confirmation from Kaina, he moved to open the quite large doors of the mansion. What he found was utter darkness, with the only source of light being the sun shining behind him upon the entrance, but even that was enough to highlight something resting precisely on the middle of the room. It was a lone TV on a table. The feeling of déjà vu had him blinking for just a moment, his eyes sweeping around the seemingly otherwise empty room before they landed on the TV once more. A sigh left his lips, already having an idea as to where this was going. That didn't stop him from moving towards the middle of the room, nor from sitting on the chair resting right in front of the table. The result? Well. It has been a while, hasn't it? Uzumaki Naruto. Shigaraki Tamura's face suddenly appearing on the screen, sporting nothing but a smile on his chapped lips. I'll assume you found the tracker I put on compress. Not wanting to lose time with meaningless talk, he asked as such without missing a beat. You have become craftier than before, but indeed I did. He confirmed it quick enough, to which he could only shake his head. I hope you don't mind. I did want to talk to you after so long, but I think we aren't ready for a proper meeting just yet. Yeah, well, I don't really care. He said as he stood up from his seat. Unless the next thing coming out of your mouth is your address, I rather we skip whatever monologue you had prepared. I heard enough of those from your master for a lifetime already. How impatient. But even to his words, Tamura simply laughed in a way that made his eyes narrow in response. But fine. We're both busy people, so I'll go straight to the point. What are you trying to achieve with this little crusade of yours, exactly? Your head in a stick. He answered with a deadpan, thinking that it was obvious enough. How crude, but the feeling is mutual, so who am I to judge? The amusement he saw clearly on display on Tamura's eyes only made him frown. If I'm being honest, I think dragging you into all of this was the biggest mistake from my master's part, one that even ended in his death. If only you knew, he whispered under his breath, thinking of how literal Tamura's description actually was. And what makes you think that I don't? It isn't just his quirks that my master bestowed upon me. I wonder what the world would think if they knew the kind of monster that is living among us, especially when this isn't even your world. And then, before he could even process what he had heard properly, Tamura's visage was gone, leaving nothing but static being displayed on the screen. He glared at it, cursing himself for thinking All For One had kept that tidbit of info for himself. It seemed the ancient villain had been far more forthcoming with Tamura than he had expected. The complicated things, just a bit. Looking on the bright side, at least the place didn't explode this time. Oh. 5 seconds later, when the mansion did, in fact, explode, it made him decide to stop testing his luck so often because it clearly wasn't working for him. This wasn't what she had expected. When she had been recruited by Uzumaki of all people, she hadn't expected to also have to play sparring partner with the guy. It wasn't like her quirk was particularly good for a one-on-one brawl, after all, so her only real advantage was that she knew how Uzumaki fought. Or at least, she thought she did. Because nothing of what she had been told about him, or even witnessed herself, could have prepared her for what she was facing now. That red energy of his. That was his quirk, alright, she knew plenty of it already. Alongside boosting Uzumaki's physical capabilities, he could also control it at will, like extending it from his hands like massively long claws, for example. It also let him stick to surfaces and walk on water for some reason, but all of that she had known already. Controlling the elements was a completely different matter altogether. Wind release. Gale palm. Which was why she was barely able to jump upwards before she was blasted by wind of all things. It was at moments like these she was grateful that she still had the quirk All For One had gifted to her. Otherwise, and judging by the way the trees behind her were pretty much decimated, she would probably be in a bad spot right now. Well, a worse spot, given that she was forced to block the punch that the second Uzumaki that had appeared right behind her had thrown at her. Because he could also make copies of himself now apparently. Were you going easy on me before? It was at the end of their session that she asked that through gritted teeth as sweat went down her forehead, with a glare aimed at Uzumaki, who seemed to be on his own little world as he sat on the ground meditating. She didn't know how else to describe it. Would you believe me if I told you I forgot I could do any of that? He told her as he cracked open one eye for just a moment to look at her before closing it once more, only earning a snort from her in response. She didn't know if he was being serious or not. A seemingly frustrated breath left him then soon after, making her raise an eyebrow in question, but before she could say anything he was already on his feet, looking down at her with a look that she was already starting to understand, meant she would be having a headache soon enough. You're done? I want to try water next. What the hell did he mean water next? You're still alive, right? Yeah. That was the only thing he could answer back as a sigh left his lips. His eyes glued to the flaming remains of the mansion as he grabbed the Hiraishin kunai he had lodged on a tree before going in. I'll assume it was a trap. Something like that. He didn't know if to truly considered one with how little it actually did. Was Tamura that arrogant to think that would have taken him out? Because the only thing he had accomplished was wasting his time at best. Maybe it was just another one of his childish games. It was honestly either that or. Wait, I'm seeing something. Things weren't done just yet. What is it? Something is flying towards you. Kaina's tone was nothing but serious, her words making him look up immediately. A person, silver hair and flying fast, at this rate they'll be there in a few seconds. Kaina. He interrupted her, his mind quickly putting two and two together. Leave now, I'll meet you in the rendezvous point. Make sure no one sees you. What? I'm not leaving you just like that. We can't have the heroes knowing you're with me just yet. He shuddered down once more, his gaze still aimed up as he hid the kunai inside his vest. I'll be fine, but we can't show all our cards yet. Leave. And without waiting for an answer, he quickly pocketed the transmitter too, just as a frown set itself in his face. So that was Tamura's move. To throw the heroes at him as if they were dogs. That seemed to be the case, that he had somehow leaked the fact that he would be here to the heroes, because judging by Kaina's description and by what he knew about the heroes that worked close to this area, the one coming at him probably was. The gyre wave. He was prepared for it as he jumped to the side the moment he saw the silver figure above, her attack clashing on the ground where had stood just a moment prior. His attention wasn't on his current attacker though, for if there was one thing he knew, it was that she didn't work alone. So, when the sound of leaves rustling was heard from behind him, he called forth on the Kyuubi's chakra immediately, coating his arms with it just as he turned around, just in time to grab the quite literal crab claw that had tried to trap him. Rolling backwards on the ground, he dragged the owner of the claw with him, a grunt of pain leaving the newcomer as he then kicked him on the stomach, sending him flying to the opposite end of the clearing, just as he stood up once more. That made two, which then only left. Power. It was only because he was ready that the upcoming fist didn't hit him in the face, just as the third figure seemingly popped out from the ground below. Even so, it was close enough so that he could throw his own punch at his stomach. Of course, it didn't connect, but rather it just went through his body as if it was nothing, but he had already expected as such, so not losing the momentum of him attack he jumped once more so that he could have all the newcomers in his line of sight. To think that, of all heroes, it would be them. And even as slight pain surged from his head, he still offered them nothing but a smile as the trio now stood a few meters away from him. Yo. It's been a while, senpais. Chapter 8. Remembrance. The Big Three. That's how Aizawa had called them, the three greatest upcoming heroes currently studying at UA. And if he was being honest, he had been excited to actually meet them once Aizawa had told him and his class that they would be coming today. How couldn't he be? The three strongest of the whole school. Of course he was excited. He could finally see how he measured up with some of the best. But when they finally arrived they weren't what he had expected, to say the least. Sure, the blonde one with the baby face looked strong, but it was hard to get a read on when the guy was spending most of his time calming down the second member of the trio, a black-haired guy that looked like he wanted to be anywhere except here. That left the third member, the only girl of the group. Who had been just a moment prior zipping between his friends and asking them questions way too fast to the point they didn't even get to answer. But now she was just standing in front of him, seemingly in deep thought as a humming sound left her. His eyes darted to the sides, trying to see if any of his friends had an answer for this. They had none, of course. And looking at the blonde guy of the group, the only thing he got was a chuckle, almost as if he had expected this. Are those whiskers mark part of your quirk? Suddenly though, she asked, earning his attention back and making him frown in response. That wasn't the first time someone had asked him that, after all those marks of his were quite distinctive, even though they seemed to have no relationship with his actual quirk. Well, that's prrrrrrrrrr. What this was though, was the first time someone just suddenly rubbed said marks after asking that. He grabbed her wrists immediately, blood going to his cheeks as nothing, but embarrassment grew inside of him. Maybe, no one had heard it. He had tried to keep it a secret and the last thing he needed was his whole class. Did you just purr? Mina's words cut through the silence in the room like a hot knife, also making him feel as if someone had stabbed with him with that very same knife just a moment later. I did not. He denied it immediately, his face growing even hotter at the looks he was receiving. Oh my god, you totally did. Denki wasn't helping either. Shut up, that's not true, prrrrrrrrr. He grew even more mortified when, because of everyone else distracting him, the girl had taken her chance to rub on his cheeks again. That's just adorable. Kyoka's comment almost had him banging his head against his desk. The fact that it was followed by Bakugo's loud laughter didn't do good things with his mood. And glaring at the girl that was responsible of this, the only thing he got was a star-eyed look, one that had him more than a bit worried about his future. Combined with the apologetic and resigned looks he was getting from the other senpais, something told him things weren't going to go well from now on. Fighting against heroes was not something that he liked. It was an aspect of the decision that had made that he understood would be happening, but it didn't make it any more enjoyable for him. And that was ignoring the moral aspect of it, after all, unlike with villains, it wasn't like he liked fighting those that were also trying to protect others, especially when it came to those that he had once considered close friends and comrades. But the main issue when facing heroes was that he simply couldn't let himself go all out, for more than one reason. First, there was the nature of most of his technique. He didn't want to permanently harm or outright kill any hero, after all, which made things a bit complicated when most of the things he knew how to do were meant to do just that. When he had been thought about how to deal with enemies, it had been with the use of lethal force above anything else. That brought up the second issue. That anything he showed in front of a hero would sooner or later be known by all of them. Keeping techniques and skills a secret was far easier when he knew the victim wouldn't be able to share anything about it to others, like with Nomus. But he couldn't exactly go around killing the heroes just to keep his repertoire a secret, now could he? He had only used certain techniques in front of them, trusting that they wouldn't be able to figure out the inner details of how they worked, given the circumstances, but if he were to use too much in front of this particular group, it might just make things worse for him in the long run. Which is why he had hidden his only Hiraishin kunai. Which is why he knew he would mostly be relying on the Kyuubi's chakra, or rather what they thought was his quirk. Because if there was one thing all his three senseis had agreed on, it was that information was power, and it was an advantage he refused to lose right now. But as all those thoughts flashed through his head, the only outward reaction he made was to grin. "Yes, I can't convince you lot of just letting me go?" he asked, knowing that the only thing he was gaining was a bit more of extra time before they came at him. But that was all that he wanted, for every second he got was another one he spent on figuring out a plan. Maybe if it was just one of them, he could have just brute force it without much of an issue. He was sure there was only one hero in this country that could actually give him trouble by herself, but right now he was dealing with a trio that actually knew how to work together, with pretty versatile quirks that he would rather not underestimate. He also needed to make sure they couldn't track him without showing too much, and needed to buy kinda enough time too, so the number of complications kept piling on. "You're coming with us, Naruto." The one that answered back was Mirio, the ever-present leader figure of the group. "We can fix all of this up if you just cooperate with us. Our definition of fixing things is vastly different," was his answer, just as the Kyuubi's chakra started to cover his body once again. Sure, he knew it wasn't a necessity when he could fight using his own chakra and without the cloak, but once again, information was the key to victory in most cases, and he wasn't willing to let such an advantage go. "Naruto-kun, please." Now it was Najira who pleaded, and even he couldn't ignore the crestfallen look on her face. "We don't want to fight you, we just want everything to go back like it was before, so please. Uzumaki, I don't know why you're doing this, but I know you wanted to be a hero more than anything else." Tamaki seemed to follow next, his somber voice now being uncharacteristically serious. "And too refused to believe that has changed. When I lost my quirk, you told me to never give up on myself, and that one way or another, it wouldn't be the end of Lemillion." Finally, almost as if they rehearsed it, Mirio gave a step up. "And I never did, thanks to Yasuo. Now I'm here to tell you that I'm not giving up on you, Naruto." When their words ended, the only thing he could do was to widen his smile just a bit, even as a sharp pain formed in his head. His response to their declarations came just a moment later, in the form of a tail forming right behind him, just before he lunged at them with only one purpose. To not lose. "Please. No. Not again. Pretty please. With a cherry on top. I don't even like cherries." He whispered out, trying his best at keeping his focus purely on the book that rested in front of him. It was hard by default, considering how much he hated having to actually study for stuff, but it wasn't like he could depend on Izuki's and Momo's help all the time, right? He knew they wouldn't have minded. They had let that fact pretty clear, but he still felt like a bum by having to rely on them all the time just to keep his grades on passable level. Which is why he had decided to spend most of his day here, in the library. But if studying by his lonesome was a hard task, doing it while having a pouting Najira sitting right to his side was just impossible. And just because he refused to let her rub his cheeks again. She had been doing that every time they met now, shouldn't she be getting tired of it by now? "I would never get tired of that," she suddenly declared with such an uncharacteristic amount of seriousness that he skipped the part where he got worried about her seemingly reading his mind and went straight to the bit of him, dreading the actual possibility of her words. "Look, I have a math test coming up soon." Just saying those words were enough to send a shiver down his spine. He could be training right now or hanging out with his friends, but knew UA just had to have math classes too. "So, unless you're willing to help me over here, I can't." "Oh, let me see." But then, almost as if taking his words as an actual invitation, she pushed her chair closer to his, interrupting him in the process, right before resting her chin on his shoulder to seemingly peek at what he had been reading. "Oh, that's an easy one." "Easy one, my ass," was his immediate response, for there was nothing easy about having to somehow multiply numbers with letters. "But it is." And then, to seemingly prove a point, she took out a pencil out of her bag right before grabbing his notebook, which was by now filled with failed attempts at solving the problem presented in the book, and dribbling something on it for a few seconds. "Here, see? It's easy." It took him a few seconds to realize she had just solved the equation in a matter of seconds, his dumbfounded look going from his notebook to the mathbook and then to the smiling Najira, before repeating the cycle a few more times. "Are you actually Lekesmert?" he asked, honestly perplexed. Had he been on the wrong for assuming Najira wasn't the sharpest tool in the toolbox? It's not like he thought she was stupid or anything, she was a third year after all, but still. He couldn't hide the disbelief from slipping through his voice. "That's now how you compliment others, how rude." Her newfound pout was followed by her crossing her arms over her chest right as she harumphed. "Sorry." He scratched the back of his head, not believing today of all days he would find out about Najira's seemingly prowess when it came to math of all things. But that meant she could help him then, right? He shook his head at such thought, not because he believed she couldn't do it, but because the whole point of this was to not have to depend on others for his grades. He was already bothering Momo and Izuki enough as it was, he didn't need to bother Najira too. It's not a bother. And once more, she seemed keen about proving to him that her quirk also let her read minds or something. "Helping my favorite underclassman will never be a bother, Naruto-kun. I'm your favorite." That little tidbit caught him off guard, for even though he wouldn't deny they had gotten closer for the last few months, to say he was her favorite. "Well, yeah." She answered with a shrug, one of her fingers then going right under her lip as she seemed to go deep in thought. "Everyone else just start ignoring me or avoiding me after a while, but you don't seem to really mind me that much." "Oh. Great." Now he was feeling like an asshole for trying to get rid of her just a few minutes ago. Sure, he knew firsthand just how intense she could be, so he sort of could understand not everyone wanting to keep up with her, but even so. "Fine, if you want to help you can help." He ended up agreeing with a sigh, earning a giggle from an obviously amused Najira. You can be really shy sometimes, you know. Shut up. He grumbled out, only making her laugh even more. Now came the hard part, however. And like, I guess you can rub them a bit after we're done, but just for a few seconds, alright? His last words were said in panic once he saw that dangerous glint in her eyes, but it seemed it had felt on deaf ears, given how she was already raising her hands, her fingers twitching in obvious anticipation. At least, they both made true of their words that day. The first one he needed to get rid of was Najire-chan. While her quirk could be considered a bit more straightforward than the other two, her aerial capabilities and long-range attacks would be an issue if he just let her float around on the field. Besides, Lemillion's and Sun Eater's attacks were exclusively melee-based, unlike Najire-chan's, and those he could deal with just fine. Which is why, when he had launched himself at them, he had aimed specifically at her. But they were prepared, for even before he got to her, she had already taken flight, and in her previous place, both Sun Eater and Lemillion were already waiting for him. He twisted his body in response, the palm of his hands touching the ground in what he was sure looked like a handstand, right before he used his arms to launch himself from the ground, going above the two and straight upwards towards Najire-chan. As if. But whatever momentum he had was killed by two limbs grabbing him by his feet, one being a tentacle from Sun Eater and the other one being Lemillion's hand, as he had seemingly jumped in tandem with him high enough to grasp him. Najire wave. In such position, he could only raise his arm to block her attack, the cloak protecting him from any real damage, but it was still enough to send him flying backwards. Skidding to a stop, he was barely able to raise his head and arm in order to grab Sun Eater's crab arm, but just as he did, another body emerged from his front. He raised his knee, just in time to block Lemillion's low-aimed fist, but said punch ended up slamming right into his gut anyway, as his arm went starlight through his leg. Najire flood. He didn't need to look up to know what was coming, especially given the way Lemillion and Sun Eater suddenly moved away from him, right before he felt the pressure of her attack. That one actually stung a bit, he whispered under his breath right before he extended his left arm towards her, the Kyuubi's chakras immediately acting on his command and extending itself in a long claw, one that would have caught Najire-chan if she hadn't barely moved out of the way. His other hand moved swiftly to the pouch glued to his leg, a kunai now in his grasp that he used just in time to block Sun Eater's scorpion stinger, just as he made the tail on his back to make a sweep behind him, knowing it would only go through Lemillion, but only needed the extra second it earned him. Jumping upwards, he spun himself in the air, his left hand already taking more objects from his pouch, right before he threw them at his flying opponent, the shuriken spinning through the air as they zoned in towards Najire-chan. She destroyed them mid-fly, however, as she reacted quickly enough, even though her surprise at his use of weaponry had been obvious for him to see. Not like his failed attack shocked him though, for he hadn't expected for it to ring true. Which was why he had also thrown the kunai right behind the shuriken, and just like before, Najire-chan made her movement to destroy the projectile. But this time, it didn't work. For the kunai itself exploded way before she could destroy it, going off in a massive flash that had caught the trio by surprise, given the way they were forced to shield their eyes. That opening was more than enough for him, as another claw made of the Kyuubi's chakra shot itself towards her, a grunt of pain leaving her as he pretty much caught in the chakra construct. The yell of pain she released right a moment later when he slammed her against the ground face first came out far louder than the previous one. In less than a second, he was already above her, his weight on her back as he sat on her body, one hand pushing the side of her face to the ground just as he raised the other one in order to. "I'm sorry." But before he could continue, such cry left her lips, her watery eye looking up at him in what could only be described as regret. "We should have been there for you when you needed us. I should have been there. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but please, I don't to lose you again." By the end of it, her words were more like sobs, ones that did had him stopping for a fraction of a second, his mind going back briefly to the days he knew she was referring to. The days where all for one had tried, or rather succeeded, into turning his allies against him, where even his closest friends had started giving him looks of distrust. Not his happiest memories, to say the least. But it was something he didn't regret it happening. After all, for as much as it had pained him, he probably wouldn't have recovered his memories if it hadn't happened. He wouldn't have become himself again. Or at least, as close as humanly possible given the rather strange circumstances. And as such, against Najire's honest declaration, the only thing he could do was to bring his hand down, right on her neck, one last gasp, leaving her before her body went limp. He slowly stood up, turning his body to look at the angry faces of Lemillion and Sun Eater. "One down, 2 more to go. Thank you, Uzumaki." "I mean, I don't mind," but he said with a frown, his gaze going from the dejected-looking Tamaki to the door that led out from the building's rooftop. "You wouldn't expect me to just keep playing interference every time a girl tries to confess to you, right?" The shifty look he got in return told that was exactly what Tamaki had been hoping for, which only made him sigh. Come on man, if you don't want to go out with them just tell them. He knew it wasn't easy but seriously. I'm sure they'll get the hint sooner or later. You've seen how they were with Tagata. His voice was making it sound as if they were discussing some sort of maniacal evil plan. They'll never stop even when you say no. Girls are dangerous and crafty. I'll tell Najire you said that. Please don't. It was quite the sight, considering how strong he knew Tamaki was, to see him cowering like that just by the mention of the upbeat Najire. He kind of got it, but still. This will be a good practice for you. Tamaki continued, now giving him a narrowed gaze. Why you'll probably have it even worse than Tagata. What do you mean? He doubted anyone would ever get more popular than Mirio. Nothing, just and why he looking so tired all of a sudden. Be on your guard or you'll get devoured. They're just girls, dude. His best friend was a girl even, and her dangerousness had more to do with her being able to punch holes through walls than being of the opposite sex. Anyway, guess I'll leave you to whatever you were doing before you called me acting as if you were dying. Why you're leaving? Tamaki gave him a perplexed look, almost as if he couldn't understand the fact he had other stuff to do. I can't exactly play guard dog the entire afternoon. Unless he wanted Azawa on his ass for slacking off of course. And I know how much you like to be by yourself so, don't mind me. So with a shrug he moved to leave, his hand reaching for the door. I don't mind if it is you. Tamaki's last murmur stopped him on his track however, just as he turned around to give him a curious glance. That was probably the closest thing he was going to get for an open invitation of hanging out with him, wasn't it? 5 minutes later and they were both simply resting on the floor of UA's rooftop, their hands behind their heads just as their eyes were glued to the blue sky above. Sorry, he had Tamaki whisper to his side once more. I know this isn't the most exciting hobby, but… Nah, it's cool. He answered with a grin, earning a surprised look. This isn't half bad from time to time. It really wasn't all things considered and he could imagine way better things to do than looking at clouds for a bit. Besides, and even though he didn't understand the why at the time, doing something like this brought a comforting level of nostalgia. He wasn't sure, especially since he couldn't remember a thing of his past, but he didn't dislike that feeling at all. Why? Sun Eater yelled, just as his newly transformed lower half, which now looked like that of a horse, tried to stomp him to the ground. Why does it have to be like this with you, Uzumaki? He simply kept dodging backwards through his attacks, the fight now having been moved deeper among the trees, rather than the clearing from before. On one hand, it gave him the advantage of Sun Eater not being able to use some of his transformations properly, so he wouldn't have to worry about more aerial attacks. On the other hand, he now had Lemillion jumping from tree to tree, or rather launching himself from them like a pinball, as he used the speed given by his quirk to try and connect some blows while his attention was on Sun Eater. Why can't you see that we just want to help you? His declaration was followed by branches appearing from his arms, moving into an attempt at trapping him. He made him flinch back when he destroyed them however, with a simple swipe of his crimson-cloaked hand. But before he could press on, Lemillion was on him again, this time with a kick aimed at his head that he was forced to crouch in order to avoid, just to have him moving through him a second later, stopping his attempt at grabbing him by the leg. He turned around in order to focus at Lemillion, but even though his back was to Sun Eater, that didn't mean he had forgotten about him. Quite the opposite in fact, considering how his tail had gone directly at his neck, wrapping itself around Sun Eater's neck, forcing him to try and gasp for breath. Sun Eater. He heard Lemillion's yell, but as soon as he saw him pop out of a tree, he sent another crimson claw towards the place, earning a wide-eyed look as he was forced to use his quirk to not be caught on the Kyuubi's chakra. Unlike Sun Eater, who he could already feel had stopped struggling, a result of him passing out by a lack of oxygen. Using his tail, he threw the limp body towards Lemillion, who caught it without missing a beat. He saw his pain glare aimed at him, to which he simply went back into his stance. "Do down, one more to go. Are you an idiot? Stop saying stuff like that." And then, he punched him. Straight up a fist to the face, one that had Mirio staggering back, a shocked look on his face as he raised his hand to touch his bruised up cheek. In his defense, considering the things he had just heard, the guy deserved far more than just one smack to the face. "Didn't you say you wanted to save a million people?" He yelled out in frustration, both of his hands tied into fists. "After everything I saw from you, do you really think I'm going to let you just throw the towel? I don't know how it feels to lose a quirk and I don't think I ever want to know." He lamented, his expression turning from frustrated to pained regret as he remembered the consequences of their clash with Overhaul. "But even if things are hard right now, I trust Eri-chan. I know she'll be able to give you your quirk back when she's ready. I don't know when that will be but I can't accept you giving up before even trying." By the end of his words his own breathing was ragged, his glare aimed at a surprised-looking Mirio, who simply blinked at him for a few seconds before a chuckle suddenly left his mouth, one that him now as the confused one out of the two. "What's so funny? I'm trying to have a serious conversation here, damn it." He shot back, almost feeling as if he was being mocked at right now. Sorry, I just it even took a few seconds for him to finally finish laughing. "I'm really happy to hear about your honest feelings, Naruto, but I think you got it wrong. I have no intention of stopping being a hero." Oh, a heat went up to his cheeks after hearing that, his reaction only making Mirio look even more amused. "Then why did you keep saying weird stuff like that, huh? You made it sound as if you were abandoning UA right now." "I guess that one is on me, sorry about that." He did not look sorry at all. "I just wanted to make sure there would be someone there for Eri-chan until I get my quirk back. If more dangerous individuals were to learn about her quirk then even with UA's protection, I can't help but to worry. That's why I wanted you to promise me you were going to look after her for me until I'm ready, until Lemillion can fight once more." Then, he saw Mirio raise his hand, his ever-present smile on his face. "Can you promise me that, Naruto? You're acting as if I wasn't going to do it in the first place." Now it was him who has laughing, just as he grasped Mirio's hand in a firm grip. "I'll protect Eri-chan no matter what, that's a promise." "Thank you, Naruto." It was as if a weight has been lifted from Mirio, given the obvious relief showing in his face. "Just don't forget about us after you get your quirk back." Now it was his turn to laugh. Things might not be going for the best right now, but as long as they kept pushing through, he knew things would get better. It was something he believed firmly. Lemillion's quirk was problematic. He couldn't block without getting hit most of the time, and he couldn't strike him back easily even when he dodged. So even with his companions down for the count, it wasn't like the battle was over already. Or at the very least, that would have been true before. But now there was one key detail Lemillion didn't know about him. He wasn't the first opponent that could make himself intangible that he had faced. And unlike certain traitorous Uchiha, Lemillion's ability was far more limited in scope, which made it far more mainable. Which is why, when he moved the fight back to the clearing, he met Lemillion's fist head-on with his own. Of course, his attack went straight through his head, hitting nothing but air, while Lemillion's fist went inches away from his face as he tilted his head to avoid the hit. Knowing that he would now phase through him, he spun around on the spot in order to backhand him. The result was Lemillion's fist this time hitting him straight on the face, just as his own hand went through his head. That was fine with him though, for knowing he couldn't see at that moment because of his quirk, he let go of the small sphere he had been hiding on his other hand. The result being immediately apparent as the area was suddenly filled with purple curtain of smoke. What? Then, it only took an extra second for Lemillion to stop using his quirk, but as he seemingly realized something was wrong, he knew it was already too late. So when he walked out of the poisonous smoke following Lemillion, he was greeted with the sight of him kneeling over, seemingly gasping for breath as even more sweat than before went down his forehead. "Don't worry, you'll be fine after like an hour or two, since you really didn't inhale that much of it," he explained as he walked closer. But, why you? That type of thing don't really work on me." He shrugged, not even stopping his pace as he walked past him. The Kyuubi's ability to clean up such toxins from his body was certainly useful from time to time, and having Jiren at his disposal did get him access to some nasty stuff he could work with. But even as he considered the fight as good as over, he still stopped his walk right before looking behind his shoulder, just in time to see Lemillion standing up, albeit barely, with a pained frown on his face. In another moment in time, he would have been impressed by such display, but right now it only made him shake his head before going back at his attempt of leaving this place. Wait, Naruto. Don't leave it, this isn't why you. He heard his words through pained breaths, but he offered nothing in return. Words weren't exactly going to stop him by now, not after everything he had decided needed to be done. Didn't you want to be a hero? What happened to that dream of yours? That dream had not been his own. What about your friends? Why you think they will let Yao back to everything just like that? This was all for the best and necessary course of action. His friends might not see that, and the heroes might think he had gone insane, but that was fine. He had already made peace with that fact. What about Deku? This time, a sharp pain struck him on his head, one that he had started to link to whenever someone brought her up, but that still didn't stop him. He couldn't. What about Eri? You promised me, Naruto. And as soon as he said that name, and as much as he hated to admit it, he faltered. It had been for just a fraction of a second, barely even noticeable, but judging by the sudden silence, it had been more than enough. The sound of Mirio's body hitting the ground a second later did little to comfort him. He just wanted to leave that place. The picture. This is the last time I'll see you guys around here, right? he explained while refusing to look at the trio in the eye, already feeling embarrassed enough by what he was saying. So I just thought it would be like, cool or something, I don't know. You were right, Najire. He is adorable when he gets flustered. Mirio's chuckle only made him glare at them in response, receiving a grin from Mirio, a more demure smile calmed Tamaki, and a starry-eyed look from Najire. You know what? Screw it, just go get graduated or something, I don't care anymore. He grumbled out, more than ready to leave the empty classroom. Well, empty besides them of course. This is what he got for trying to get a last good memory with them before they left the school for good. But before he could move, Najire was already hugging his right arm, while Tamaki had a hand on his left shoulder, all while Mirio put his phone on one of the desks, right before he moved to stand behind them. Alright, don't forget to say plus ultra. And as Mirio cheered out, with Najire beaming at the camera while Tamaki gave a more subdued smile, he couldn't hold the grin that showed off on his lips. UA was about to get a bit more lonely now that the school year was about to end, but even so, that just meant he would have to work harder to catch up to them, right? So what's the plan now? She asked as she adjusted her sunglasses, her gaze going briefly to the dark-haired man walking beside her, a deep frown on his face. She understood why he had changed his appearance with that quirk of his, but she still found it a bit bizarre that Uzumaki could just transform into other people. It made blending in far easier though, especially right now that they were just walking through the streets, as if he hadn't just come out of a fight with a group of heroes. Hey? Is everything alright? She asked once more when he said nothing to her question, and when he said nothing still, she ended up shoving her elbow to his side, not earning any reaction, except for a light sigh leaving his lips. Yeah, I just have a headache, I guess. His voice was now mellow, which she didn't know if it was because of his headache as he called it, or because of his change in appearance. Right, she didn't push for another answer, knowing she wasn't going to get anything from him if he didn't want to share it in the first place. Our next move, then. Since this one was a bust. It wasn't. He answered back soothly, the corner of his lips twitching for just a moment. I wasn't expecting to actually find Tamura just like that. The guy isn't that much of an idiot, but now he thinks our plan failed, which means he isn't going to expect our real attack. And that one would be. She decided to skip the bit where she got upset at him for not telling her his entire plan, he could save that for when they were out from the public eye. Because unless you have another way of tracking him you do, don't you? That smile was the only answer she needed, even if it looked more than a bit off on his current face. Let's just say I inherited more than just my mom's quirk from my parents. His answer was as cryptic as always, which only made her snort in response. If she had to bet, he was about to pull off a new quirk out of his ass and then act as if it was the most normal thing in the world. But first he then stopped walking, and even with a different appearance, she could tell there was nothing but anger in his eyes. I need to check on something. And as annoyingly mysterious as he liked to act, even she knew by now that such frustration was being aimed at no one but himself. When he woke up that night, the first thing he thought was that the ceiling of his room was looking awfully different from what he remembered. Then, it took a few seconds for him to realize he wasn't in his room. It took a few more for his bleary eyes to lock himself on the TV in front of him, the only source of light in the living room. Then, he looked to his right, where felt a weight resting on his shoulder. Izuki was there, sleeping soundly, her head resting on his arm and a small blanket covering them both. Inko's doing, most likely. He then looked down to his left, where another weight could be felt on his lap. This time, it was eerie, a peaceful expression on her face as she rested her head on his lap, small breaths leaving her every so often, and the rest of her body covered in a blanket too. Once again, probably Inko's doing. It was to be expected, he supposed, given that they all had just seemingly fallen asleep halfway through the movie. He didn't make any more movements however, and instead simply closed his eyes once again, a content smile present on his lips. He wouldn't mind getting used to this. Chapter 9. Regrets. Yo. We're back, everyone. He announced as they stepped inside the dorm, with the sound of rushing footsteps being heard right after, becoming louder and louder with each second. Naru, Midori. The first one that reached them was Mina, an anxious look on her face. We saw the news, are you too, eh? Said anxiety, however, quickly turned into confusion as she blinked owlishly in their direction, her gaze, which was mirrored by the approaching Denki, Kyoka, Hanta, and Ejiro, making him snicker as they all seemingly frozen in place. Izuki's eye, as she stood to his side, only made him barely able to control his laughter at the sight. The silence ended up being broken by Kyoka however, whose gaze, which had been focused on what, or rather who, was on his arms, moved to meet his gaze. Did you two kidnap a child? Hey. He protested immediately, just as he felt Erie's hold on him becoming tighter. I'll have you know it's not kidnapping when the good guys do it. Feeling Erie's nodding against his chest only made his logic even more sound. He decided to ignore the way Izumi's palm met her face. What the hell was he doing? He shouldn't be here. There were many places that he had to be, but this was not one of them. Quite the opposite in fact, to the point he found himself sighing in frustration, but yet unable to just leave. He hadn't even sent a clone and had come personally, and all for what? So he could disguise himself as some random bystander while stalking a school like some sort of lunatic. This was a waste of time, there was no other way of describing it. And yet, the mere thought of leaving turned his head into a throbbing mess, to the point he had to hold himself from growling in annoyance. So he stood there, pretending to be checking something on his phone, all while drinking some really expensive coffee, his form right now having been replaced by the visage of a plain-looking brunette woman just to be sure, all while his gaze turned to the black vehicle that was parked right at the entrance of the school he had been looking over for a while now. He knew who drove that thing, so he knew perfectly well who would be coming out of the building in a matter of minutes. And not that soon after, his patience was rewarded by a scruffy-looking man walking out from the school with a child in tow. His gaze barely lasted on Izawa though, as it immediately went to the young girl walking by his side. He did his best to ignore the throbbing headache as he saw the characteristic white hair, red eyes, and small horn that all belonged to Eri. A small hiss left him as he suddenly turned, not even bothering to wait for them to get in the car. He really shouldn't have come here, for more than one reason. Happy now? He grunted under his breath, his body melding with the crowd as he moved in a hurried pace. The only response he got was a lesser, but no less annoying, throbbing of his head. You are a horrible influence on her, I hope you know that. He heard Momo grumble behind him, to which he could only offer a barely contained laugh in response. Where's Midoriya when you need her? I doubt she would approve of this. I don't know what you're talking about. He spoke with fake innocence, his hand never stopping for a second. Eri wanted to draw so we're drawing. Drawing is fun. Eri followed up with a nod, her face displaying nothing but sheer concentration and focus. He's going to get angry when he wakes up. Momo spoke with a sigh, but they were too busy with their masterpiece to care. Sure, maybe drawing on Bakugo's sleeping face wasn't exactly the best of ideas, but in that case, he shouldn't have fallen asleep on the couch like that. He's always angry anyway. Besides, he shouldn't have been towards Izuki in front of him if he wanted to avoid something like this. Oh, there's Midoriya. Ah, and that's our cue. He dropped the marker immediately before grabbing a surprised Eri and sitting her on his shoulders. Time to play hide and seek, okay Eri? He didn't even wait for a response before he bolted out of the room alongside Eri. Angry Bakugo. That he could deal with it easily enough. Disappointed Izuki on the other hand. No, thank you. Are you sure you're alright? This is the third time you asked me that already. He grunted out, sending a slight glare toward Kaina, who simply raised an eyebrow in return. I'm fine. You do realize how unconvincing that sounds, right? She sighed, prompting him to tear his gaze away from her as he started pacing around the room once more. Why was it taking his clone so long for this? Was it something Shigaraki said? He snorted at that, for just the thought of that idiot getting to him was almost enough to make him laugh. Sure, him knowing about his origin so to speak could be an issue, but there wasn't really anything Shigaraki could actually do with that info that could truly disrupt his plan anyway. But at the back of his head, he sort of wished that was the thing that had him upset, rather than a random comment done by Mirio of all people. He had prepared himself for this, he knew that the decision he had made would put him against them, and he had prepared himself accordingly. Or at least, he believed he had if one name and a reminder of an old promise was enough to get to him like this. I'll go and see if Jiren has anything for me. He needed to distract himself while his clones finished figuring out Spinner's location. Would have been easier if he had put a better seal on him than the one he had, but seals were still not his specialty. He didn't even give Kaina a chance to retort before he was gone from their safe house, knowing she would just try to pester him again about stuff he shouldn't even be feeling anymore. His sensei was most definitely turning on his grave about now. Are you sure you two have no problem with this? Aizawa asked them with his usual frown, although even he could notice it was more pronounced than usual. You aren't obligated to just say yes, I hope you both understand that. It's not like we would say no in the first place. He rolled his eyes, not understanding what the issue was. I mean come on, it's Eri. For him, that reasoning was all they needed, and although Aizawa's sigh told him he didn't agree, Izuki's nod at least was confirmation they were both on the same page. It's just a weekend anyway, Izuki followed up, although he could sense some trepidation in her tone. And if this is what Eri wants then? It'll be great. He put his hand behind his head while grinning excitedly. Just think of all the things we can pull off with her being so tiny. Please stop corrupting her. Izuki's eye only made him pout. What was this about corrupting? She was spending way too much time with Momo. You two are still heroes in training. Aizawa cut through them in a gruff tone. You should be focusing on your growth over anything else. I don't want you two to forget that. This wasn't the first time they had received this lecture from him, and while Izuki simply gave him a slow nod while pursing her lips, he just rolled his eyes before looking to the side. So what if they wanted to go the extra mile here? It's not like they were going to neglect everything else. Besides, it was Eri who they were talking about here. If someone deserved for others to go the extra mile for them, it was her. And he wasn't biased at all here. Eri. Seemingly understanding that he wasn't going to get anything else from them, Aizawa simply sighed before raising his voice. Are you done preparing? Why yes. And then she was there, walking from behind the door to the teacher's lounge room, a small backpack resting on her back. And he himself couldn't help but grin at the moment he saw the way her eyes lit up as soon as she saw them, with even a small smile appearing on her lips. For someone that was unable to smile not that long ago, he couldn't help but feel elated at seeing her like this. Gosh. And maybe because of that, he didn't waste any time in picking her up, letting her rest on his shoulders. Let's go before he gives us another lecture. Onwards. Onwards? He crackled at Eri imitating him. How could anyone say he was a bad role model? Wait, you two. Be sure he doesn't do anything too stupid. He decided to act as if he hadn't heard that. Things would be far easier if you dropped the morality act. Oh, so now you feel like talking? He whispered harshly while duking under the arm-turned hammer that was swung at his head, his fist meeting the guy's solar plexus just a second later, making him drop to his knees almost immediately. Yes, I am that bored, and seeing you having a crisis is always entertaining. The Kyuubi's voice resounded in his head once more, making him grunt as he used a chakra tail to wrap around the guy that had spikes all over his body, just to slam him against the floor with enough force to make it crack, before throwing him right at the cheetah-looking woman that tried to jump him from the opposite side. Well, glad someone is enjoying it at the very least. He huffed as he threw two kunes at her when she staggered back to her feet, aiming right at her legs. I'm not lying though. You definitely thought of it as well by now. That horn brat's ability sure would come in handy, now wouldn't it? He could feel the grin that the fox was sporting even without seeing it. I'm sure you could even make her help you willingly with the right words. She used to follow you around like a lost puppy. It was nauseating to witness. Well, you're more than free to close your eyes and pretend we can't talk like how you were doing before. Was that a guy with a snake for fingers? He would have felt more threatened if he hadn't dealt with far worse snake people by now. No finger snake could protect him from a broken jaw. What, did I touch a nerve? Does the thought of taking advantage of a hopeless child make you feel all nostalgic? The crackle that came out of the fox next made him pause for a second before he closed his eyes. You little shit. A few seconds later, the result of his messing up with his mindscape came in the form of the Kyuubi's angry roar. Was it petty? Absolutely, but he wasn't exactly in the mood for reminiscence right now of all things. What do you want? Money. I'll give it to you, so please. Oh right, he almost forgot of the boss of this little hole he was raiding. Frankly speaking, it wasn't like he had to take care of small fries like this when he finally had a lead on Shigaraki's whereabouts, but given how his deal with Jiren worked, getting rid of some of the competition from time to time was necessary, even if he doubted this guy would ever grow to become an actual threat. Then again, it was never bad to be certain, he supposed. Even if the supposed threat had just wetted himself from what he was smelling. Sadly, he couldn't finish this more permanently, but Jiren wanted the small fry alive but scared. Something about sending a message about people trying to get into his territory. At least it worked as a good enough distraction from the throbbing in his head. Like work, do you think it can help you with your memories? Her question made him pause, a frown on his face as he looked at the rather nervous-looking Eri. Was that what she had been hung up about for the last few days? Aizawa had told them she had seemed rather pensive after she was successfully able to rewind to Gata's quirk, but he hadn't thought it was about that of all things. And here he thought bringing her out to get some ice cream would be a nice way to get her to relax, and yet it seemed the issue was related to him in the first place. You just used your quirk, though, didn't you? He scratched the back of his head as he tried to find the best way to address this. I don't think you'll be able to use it for a while now. But he saw her purse her lips in frustration, making him laugh at the sight. You already did more than enough, Eri. He clarified, getting her to look up at him in wonder. There's no hurry right now for you to use your quirk again, so just take it easy, okay? She seemed to disagree with the whole notion given the pout she sent his way. She reminded him of Izuki in that regard, with both wanting to bite more than what they could chew. I just want to help you too, Eri whispered after her gaze went low again, prompting him to scratch the back of his head. Maybe he shouldn't have done this without Izuki, she would probably know what to do here. An idea popped up in his head though, and as he finished his ice cream with a grin, he went and kneeled in front of the still downtrodden Eri, his blue eyes meeting her confused red ones. Alright, let's do this then. He raised his right hand, his pinky as his smile became softer. After I become a pro I'll save a space for you, so when you're older I'll take you as my sidekick. How does that sound? Really? And he could have sworn he saw her eyes sparkle as if she was trying to imitate Aoyama. Really? And to his affirmation, she quickly linked her pinky to his. It was something Izuki had shown her, a gesture she had taken quite a liking to. Frankly, he didn't even know if Eri wanted to be a hero or not when she grew up. He would definitely understand if she wanted a more quiet life after what she already went through, but if she did decide to become a hero like him and Izuki then, well. He wasn't going to pass on having an awesome sidekick like her. I still think he can be reasoned with, Deku. He finished with a sigh as he got comfortable in his hospital bed. Sure, it might take a lot of force, but he's definitely not as far gone as some of the news would have you believe. That's the impression he got, at the very least. Was he upset that he and his friends had been so easily defeated? Yes, but he could tell there was something off with Naruto throughout the entire thing, and as such, he refused to accept that he was doing all of this just because he decided to go rogue out of nowhere. There had to be a reason, or at least something that they could use to fix this mess. People didn't decide one day to just go and become vigilantes, especially not someone like Naruto. He could definitely think of a few reasons as to why though, given what had happened years ago, but he didn't want to come to any conclusions before hearing it from the man himself. One thing remained certain, however. He froze when I mentioned Eri. He said, finally getting Deku to stop looking down at her hands and to look at him in surprise. So while I have no idea what's going on that head of his, I'm at least sure he hasn't just forgotten about everyone. To his words, Deku simply nodded slowly, her gaze gaining just a bit more of a spark at the end, to which he could only smile in relief. Thank you, Takata-senpai. Her expression turned from grateful to serious in just a second, however, right before she stood up from her seat. The clue that led you to that place, how did you get it? Just some anonymous tip. His own expression turned serious as well, with his finger resting on his chin as he tried to remember the details he had received. Our agency got a call saying we could find remnants of the League at that place. It's not the kind of clues we usually follow through, but given everything that has been going on, we decided to at least check. Deku nodded at his words, her expression telling him a million thoughts were going through her head at that moment. Do you mind if I get more info from your agency? I want to see if it can lead us to something. She requested, to which he could only nod. He was thinking of doing the same, after all. It was too suspicious not to say the least. And right now they needed all the leads they could get. Alright, I'll admit it, this is just adorable. It is, isn't it? I still think we shouldn't have bargained in like this. Relax, Yamomo. Naru won't care. Worst case Izuki can just do some doe eyes at him and he'll be good. What is that supposed to mean? Earl doesn't even know how lucky she is. Typical. He was woken up by the arguing and cooing. That was, for some reason, happening around his bed. He recognized those voices of course, which is why when he groggily opened his eyes, it was so with more confusion than anything else. What are you guys doing here? He massaged the bridge of his nose before giving a narrowed gaze at the girls that had decided to invade his room so early in the morning, on a weekend no less. And they were all here, all the girls from his class, so he could only assume they must have a valid reason for this. Actually, weren't they having some sort of sleepover just yesterday? Was thing what girls did in those? If so then that was just weird. He's thinking of something rude. Toru voiced out, and even without seeing her, he could feel the pout that she sent his way. Chill dude. Jiru followed up, a small smirk on her lips as she pointed at his chest. We lost someone halfway through the night, but lo and behold, we found her. He blinked confusedly, only now realizing there was some extra weight on his chest. When he looked down, he was greeted by a mop of white hair and a small horn. Huh? She can be quite sneaky when she wants to, Kiro. Sayu said with a tilt of her head, and what an understatement that was if Eri had been able to just sneak into his room without him noticing. How did you guys lose a kid in the first place? He sent them an incredulous look. For all the sass he got from them from time to time, at least he wasn't going around losing kids, and there were 7 of them so, what was their excuse? She was able to stay awake longer than us. Momo looked embarrassed by having to admit that. I think she tricked us when she said she was ready to go to sleep. Achako chuckled awkwardly as she scratched the back of her head. It's tough. Mina followed up in a sagely tone for some reason. Yeah, well, can you help me here? Kind of need to go to the bathroom now and I don't want to wake her up. She looked so peaceful in her sleep right now that the last thing he wanted to do was to accidentally wake her up by moving too much. Sure, let me Izuki started but stopped in her tracks once Mina put an arm around her shoulders. Ashido-san. I say we let her rest a bit more, she looks so comfortable right now and all. Mina said with a small grin before she started guiding Izuki to the door. But. Come on, Yamomo. She obviously has her favorite so who are we to interrupt? And now Kyoka was doing the same with the doubtful Momo, much to his shock. "You guys can't leave me like this," he whispered harshly, although he went silent immediately when he heard Eri murmuring a bit in her sleep. "Good luck, Kiro. Punishment for thinking rude stuff." Sorry, Naruto-kun. Traitors." His voice reached no one as they all left, leaving him and the sleeping Eri all by themselves, much to his chagrin. Nature was calling, damn it. Should he just wake her up? He doubted he would be able to go up and put her on the bed without doing so. But when he looked down at her once more, with such a content look on her face to the point she was even smiling in her sleep, he couldn't help but to sigh quietly before throwing his head back onto his pillow, a small smile of his own forming on his lips. He would just have to hold for a bit longer it seemed. "What's with you now?" Jiren's question came as a result of him missing a step as he was about to leave, just as he brought his hand to his head, his mind processing everything that had suddenly been thrown into his brain. It seemed the clones he had made had finally done what they were supposed to do. "Change of plans, Jiren." He grinned as he turned, much to Jiren's surprise. "I need to gather some info from Yokohama." It seemed old habits die hard for some people. He didn't think Shigaraki was stupid enough to return to Kamino, but if the track his clones had gathered with the seal was accurate then, maybe he had overestimated that idiot. "Anything in particular?" Jiren asked with a raised eyebrow, to which he nodded. He didn't have a specific address right now, so he would have to be creative here. "Anything you have on mutant groups?" He explained, only earning a frown before Jiren nodded, seemingly not caring about the details. If he couldn't pinpoint them precisely then, he would have to just drag them out like the rats they were. Shigaraki might be difficult, same with compress. But spinner? Easy enough. She had sneaked out of her room again. She knew it was wrong, and that Aizawa would most definitely lecture her about doing so now of all times, but she was prepared for that already. She didn't care if she got grounded or something, she needed to see him. Because it wasn't fair. They had told her Naruto had finally returned, but they weren't letting her see him yet. She was still upset she had been blocked from seeing him at all before he disappeared, but now that he was finally back and he had defeated the bad guy, they were still not letting her. She didn't understand the reason. Aizawa refused to explain, and even Deku got silent whenever she asked. So she decided to take matters into her own hands. Which is why she was now standing in front of their dorm, already past midnight. She didn't know if she would find him up or not, but worst case she could always just sneak into his room, right? It wouldn't be the first time anyway. So when she tried to tiptoe her way inside, she had expected to see no one until she reached his room. "Just talk to me, Natuto, please. I just want to understand what's going on with you." And the answer is nothing. "I already told you, you just don't like to hear it." But instead, she was greeted with a sight that was so familiar and yet so alien to her. Naruto and Deku were there, standing by the dorm's kitchen. Now usually that would be just normal, and she would have already rushed at them by now if it wasn't for the tension she could feel as she walked closer to them. "It's not nothing, Naruto. Ever since you came back you've been acting strangely. We just want to help you." "We?" "Last time I checked most people here wanted to throw me in a cell just in case." "Is that why you're acting like this?" "I'm not acting like anything. I'm just tired of the questioning when I'm just trying to keep my head low for a bit. This is more than just Eri." It seemed she had walked in too close without realizing it. "Eri, what are you doing here? It's a bit too late to be going around right now." Deku approached her with a tense smile before kneeling in front of her, but her own gaze wasn't on her yet. "I just wanted to see Naruto." She whispered, her red eyes meeting his blue ones, but where she had expected the same cheerfulness she by now associated with the boy that had saved her, she found none of that. Instead, his eyes were cold and almost devoid of any light, to the point she actually found herself shivering before she realized it. Those eyes didn't belong to the Naruto she knew. "I know you were worried, but things right now are. You should go back to your room, Eri." Deku's words were interrupted as Naruto approached them, the look on his face never changing even as he spoke. But. You should go back before Aizawa realized you're gone in the first place." He continued as he now stood beside them, his eyes forward, and even his tone could only be described as numb. "You're not being fair with her." "See, can I stay with you too?" she blurted out, interrupting Deku in the process. Just for tonight. Please." That's Deku started, seemingly struggling with what to say. "Well, right now you." "No." That answer, in such a definitive no-nonsense tone, caught her off guard to the point she thought she had heard wrong for a moment. But the way Deku suddenly stood up and for the first time in front of her, glared at Naruto, told her that she hadn't heard wrong. "I don't know what's happening with you right now, but don't take it out on Eri." Her own frown became fiercer as she looked up at the two, with Deku's glare matching Naruto's wrongful stare. "I'm going for a walk." he suddenly declared as he broke the stare right before he started walking right past them. He hadn't even bothered to look at her as he did. Her lips parted as she attempted to call out to him, but a hand on her hair, courtesy of a pained-looking Deku, stopped her in her tracks. The way she shook her head told her all she needed to know. And in the end, she could do nothing but to lower her gaze as she did her best to stop the tears that were threatening to go down her face. What if Naruto x Lady Nagant harem and My Hero Academia end here, and thanks for watching my video till the end.